Chapter 768. The day of Xiao Qing's judgment came amidst all the cursing. Are you ready? Yes. Are you afraid? Afraid? What is that? I'm uneducated and don't know the word ghost. What about you? What a coincidence. I don't know it either. Hui Mo and Ning Shu looked at each other and smiled. They led the remaining 600 guards of Nanping Wang's residence and fearlessly looked forward as they embarked on their journey. Fighting a country with a few hundred people was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. But what was there to be afraid of? It was that Meridian Gate again. The once young Empress Chao held the emperor's hand for the first time after putting on the imperial crown. Together, they accepted the worship of the common people. The applause was thunderous and the cheers were loud. That was the greatest glory of her life. Later, it was here again that Ning Shu destroyed all of her glory in front of the common people. She was even forced to personally order the execution of her elder brother. Her entire family's reputation was ruined. And today it was here again. In this place that she had missed and hated countless times, she still chose it. Because not only did she want to execute the son of the person she hated the most, she also wanted to take back her former glory. With this thought, Empress Chao got up early in the morning and put on the most dazzling makeup under Kai Bin's careful care. Then, she held the hand that Heaven's Choice Emperor extended to her and put on the most perfect smile as she boarded the imperial carriage. They paraded in front of the common people until they reached the center of Meridian Gate. Your Majesty, listen, these voices are so pleasant to hear. These are the people's love and respect for your Majesty and the country, she said. Heaven's Choice Emperor's cold face was incomparably numb. At first, he was stunned as if he didn't hear clearly. Then, he reacted in hindsight and looked at the densely packed common people. Execute the traitor. Bless the great you. Be wise. Long live the Emperor. Nanping Wang's residence, the #1 tumor. Cries like these entered his ears incessantly. And there were even cries like traitors colluding with foreign enemies. Your entire family will be executed. Death is not to be regretted. And ruthless Crown Prince, e'en spirit of the Ghost Manor, you must be exterminated. Exterminate evil and defend justice. All of them came out. Their eyes were red. Their hands were raised high. And they all bared their white teeth. Heaven's Choice Emperor listened for a while, then slowly turned his head and smiled. He said to Chao Ho, "The Empress is right. You are the mother of the country and my good wife. You have contributed greatly to this prosperity." Under the imperial canopy, Kai Bin served tea and continued to drink. Chao Ho said unhurriedly, "You are about to kill your own son. How does your Majesty feel?" Tianzhe Emperor's face turned cold. "Empress, you must be joking. I don't need any extra sons. I only need this world." Empress Chao reached out her hand and placed it on the back of his hand. "Then I will do my best to help your Majesty stabilize this world, just like 25 years ago. Now let's begin." Following Heaven's Choice Emperor's order, the once most dazzling youth of Juzhou, the Xiahou heir who dared to make the human world pale in comparison, now had his hands tied in shackles. Under the guard of the imperial guards, he appeared in front of everyone covered in dust. He was very thin, and even the belt on his body was loosened. His face was as white as jade, without a trace of blood. He was all alone. There was no trace of the glamorous and lively scene when he first entered the capital in a carriage through Zhuke Street, where people threw thousands of scented sachets and flowers at him. However, even at this point, his back was still straight, like a sword pointing to the sky. If you wanted to bend, you have to break it. Chapter 769. The moment he appeared, the people paused for a moment, and then they erupted into an uproar. It was as if he was some heinous demon that had massacred the entire city. Thus, they urgently needed to curse him to express their endless loyalty to the imperial court and great you. Rotten cabbages and rotten eggs were thrown at him. "Go to hell. You're a demon in human skin. A beast in human skin. You deserve to die. Great you should be ashamed to have someone like you. Didn't you brag that Prince of Nanping is the backbone of Great You, the great wall of human flesh, and that without you, the country would be finished? If you're so capable, Why didn't you destroy the enemy country in one go? Instead, you let them invade every year? Could it be that you colluded with the enemy country to make a show for yourself? In my opinion, you're a traitor. 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 Ever since he came to the capital, there hasn't been a single day of peace in the capital. So it's all because of him. Kill him to appease the people. Kill. 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 Their mouths were wide open, and their eyes were red with excitement. They were like crows waiting for rotten meat on a tree. Filth from all directions smashed at his feet, robes, and lapels. He truly lost his reputation. In the crowd, there were 2 or 3 youths who struggled to squeeze in the middle. They reached out and tried to explain to others, he's not like this. He's a good person, a very good person. He's done many, many good things in the past. He even redressed our father's grievances. Please believe him. But after saying a few words, he was kicked over and almost trampled to death. Xiao Qing's buzzing ears faintly recognized a few weak and familiar cries. It was Qin Xin and the others. However, he was too far away to walk over. He could only smile faintly and shake his head at them. Thank you, but there's no need. Go back and protect yourself. Listen to me. Qin Xin and the others covered their mouths and cried loudly. However, they were so insignificant that they could only squeeze together and cry helplessly. The cold-faced guard rudely pushed him forward. Your Majesty, Your Highness, I've brought Xiao Qing here. Qiao Ho put down the golden teacup in his hand that was carved with a flourishing peony. He casually raised his eyes and looked up and down at his sorry figure. He narrowed his eyes and sneered. Why don't you kneel when you see His Majesty? Xiao Qing stood there quietly, neither responding nor replying. Qiao Ho glared angrily. Impudent. The rebels and traitors simply treated the imperial power as nothing. Men, beat him for me. Understood. The guards picked up their metal rods and viciously smashed them down on those perfectly straight knees. The sound of metal and bone colliding rang out. It was a sound that made people feel cold, but it also caused a group of people to cheer. Xiao Qing swayed but did not fall. Then there was another blow. This time, it hit him hard on the left knee. Xiao Qing's veins popped out all over his body, but he still held on, refusing to fall. The executioner was ruthless. Hey, I don't believe that there's no one who can't kneel in front of Laozi. You're holding on, right? Laozi wants to see how many blows you can endure. Then the rods came again and again. Each blow seemed to want to put him to death. Xiao Qing clenched his back teeth and did not make a sound. His entire body trembled until blood seeped out between his teeth. Even his knees did not stop trembling. However, he still refused to bend down. 3, 4, 5, 10, 11, 17, 18. As the last 18 fell, the unbelievably thin person's chest finally caved in, and he spat out a large mouthful of blood. The blood rained far away and sprayed onto the emperor's chin. The emperor could not help but tremble from the heat. Chapter 770. The blood had not dripped from his chin. Tianzhe Emperor swayed and instinctively called out, Empress. Qiao looked at the few drops of blood and then at her husband who had shared the bed with her for more than 20 years, the emperor of this country. She did not know why she smiled. It was both mocking and pitying. In the end, she tilted her head and lifted her chin at the executor. What happened? You let the blood of a slut stain His Majesty's face. You really are useless. Leave. The executor trembled as he put away the metal rod. He stood to the side and waited for orders. In the middle of the Meridian Gate, the person who had been holding on with one breath finally let out a breath. He fell backwards and was lifted up by the guards in disgust to continue the trial. Qiao Ho took the handkerchief that Kai Kun offered and then leaned over to gently wipe away the dirty blood for Tianzhe Emperor. He's still breathing. Then let's continue. Otherwise, we will not be able to appease the anger of the people and give them an explanation. As her soft words fell, countless voices echoed, explanation, 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 explanation. On the city gate tower, Xiao Yuni, who was leading Yang Chengwei to guard the Meridian Gate, looked at all of this expressionlessly. His heart was complicated, and he did not say a word. Listening to the deafening voice, Emperor Tianzhe nodded. He raised his eyes and seriously looked at the child who was still breathing and had his own blood flowing in his body in the hands of the guards. He said word by word numbly, "The criminal, Xiao Qing, used the identity of Nanping Wang's heir to collude with his accomplices after entering the capital. He bribed the courtiers and was unruly and did whatever he wanted. Seeing that your Nanping Wang's mansion protected the country, I didn't expect you to dare to show your ferocious nature on the night of the midnight banquet. You tortured and killed 87 innocent palace servants and concubines in the harem, Madam Qi. You even tried to murder me and the Empress. There are witnesses and evidence. Do you plead guilty?" Xiao Qing seemed to have lost consciousness. After a long time, he seemed to faintly hear the accusation against him. He struggled to open his mouth and blurt out, "No." Tianzhe Emperor said, "What did you say?" Say it again." The corners of Xiao Qing's lips curled up weakly. He looked at the sky and said slowly, "Even if I don't, what can you do to me?" "How arrogant!" Empress Chao slammed her palm on the table and stood up in her bright yellow phoenix robe. "Your Majesty, everyone knows what the king of Nanping and his son did. Why do we need to try them? Qinxie is just a woman and a child. Naturally, I cannot compare to your Majesty's literary and military prowess. However, I have heard the sages of the past say that the people are the most important, the state comes second, and the monarch is the least important. Since that's the case, why don't we leave this case to the people?" Before the Heaven's Choice Emperor could speak, the people present became excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. It was as if everyone was holding a gavel in one hand and a judge in the other, holding the power of life and death. They were all judges. As for how this case would be investigated, why do we still need to listen to testimonies and check the authenticity of witnesses and evidence? Didn't everyone say that the crime was unforgivable? Why waste time? There was only one word: execute. Standing under the bright yellow tasseled canopy, Empress Chao raised her noble chin as if she was leading an invincible army. She sighed and said, "Originally, Qinxie wanted to spare his life out of a moment of soft-heartedness. However, now that the public opinion is like this, Your Majesty, we can only follow the public opinion." The Heaven's Choice Emperor opened his mouth and looked at that face. Countless thoughts seemed to flash through his mind. In the end, he turned his head and slowly lowered his outstretched hand. He said to the guard, then, just as the order was given and the death sentence was about to be handed down, a bolt of lightning suddenly came down from the clear sky above. Before the people could react, the ground beneath their feet began to move again. The entire ground shook and countless snakes, insects, rats, and ants swarmed in from all directions. They climbed over people's feet and scuttled up people's clothes. In an instant, the entire Meridian Gate felt danger. Fear spread across the ground. Hot oil splashed everywhere and screams rang out. The banner of justice from before was thrown to the side. Everyone covered their heads and ran for their lives. "The ground is moving. The ground is moving. Quickly run. Master Tian, what's going on here?" Heavenly thunder, earth shaking, insects rioting. Is this a sign that something strange is about to happen? Save me. Chapter 771. The Meridian Gate was in a mess, and everyone was in danger. Qin and the others supported one another and were trapped in the crowd. The moment he saw the situation, Xiao Yuni brought the guards and charged down, using his Dantian energy to shout, "Zhao Bin, protect the Emperor." Zhao Bin's horsetail whisk landed on the ground as he tried his best to summon the surrounding palace maids and soldiers. "Quick, protect His Majesty, protect the Empress. Where are the divine martial guards and Yang Chengwei? Protect the Empress and leave." The ground continued to shake, and Tianzhe Emperor grabbed onto Zhao Bin's arm. His face was unstable, but Chao Ho was decisive and scolded. "What are you panicking for? Such a small matter is not appropriate." Zhao Bin tried to persuade her, "But Empress, the lightning is really weird. You and His Majesty have the body of a true dragon and a golden phoenix. If something goes wrong, what will happen?" Xiao Yuni, who rode the wind over, said, "Mother, Your and father's safety is important. Leave the other matters to me. Chao Ho's sharp eyes looked around, and she laughed coldly. It's broad daylight, so where did the lightning come from? The earth quaked and the mountains swayed, but not a single crack appeared. Snakes, insects, rats, and ants were nothing. This consort will not leave this place today. I want to see who dares to play tricks in front of this consort. Yuni, my son, immediately bring people to keep an eye on that Xiao Qing. Do not let anyone take advantage of the chaos. Your Majesty, what do you think? Chao Ho looked over with a heavy gaze. After Tian Zhe Emperor stabilized himself, he lowered his eyes and said, "Listen to the Empress." Xiao Yuni did not know why, but he felt a chill down his spine. This chill surged into his brain, causing him to stay awake. "Akin, listen up." Chao Ho smiled, indifferent and graceful. "That's good. Kai Bin, fix your Majesty's and mine's cushions. Replace the teacups on the table with new ones. I will sit with your Majesty on this fishing platform and see which stupid fish can't wait to take the bait." In this wide meridian gate, Yang Chengwei was heavily guarded with sabers and swords in his hands, isolating the noisy commoners outside. Emperor and Empress sat calmly in the center and even drank tea peacefully. After a brief moment of panic, the citizens realized that nothing had happened and gradually calmed down. They stopped and looked at each other to see what was going on. The sun pierced through the clouds and continued to burn. Chao Ho's lips curled into a contemptuous smile. Xiao Yuni glanced at the half-dead Xiao Qing, who was supported by the guards, and a dark look flashed past his eyes. He asked in a low voice, "Is the Xiao family's son all right?" The corners of Xiao Qing's mouth, which had been silent all this time, twitched. He lazily squeezed out a voice from his chest. "There is no need for your highness to worry. I will not die." Xiao Yuni laughed. "The Xiao family's son is indeed a talent. It's a pity that Xiang Yu will commit suicide in the Wu River one day. I don't know how long the Xiao family's son can hold on." Under Xiao Yuni's expectant gaze, the corners of Xiao Qing's lips twitched slowly. Xiao Yuni thought that he had something else to say and was about to take a step closer to bend down to listen when he heard Xiao Qing chuckling softly without saying a word. It was as light as a cloud, but it was full of mockery. Xiao Yuni's expression changed, and he threw him aside. He pressed down hard on the sword and suppressed the surging anger in his chest. He raised his eyes and scanned the thousands of heads that were crowded and bustling like an eagle. "Ning Shu, you did something just now, didn't you? Are you still not willing to give up your final struggle? What else do you want to do? Today's situation is like this. You will definitely lose. You are so stubborn and stupid. For the sake of our past relationship, you'd better not appear, otherwise. Chapter 772. The sun above their heads was as hot as fire. Whether it was the emperor, the empress, Xiao Yuni, or the other officials, they were all quietly waiting for a certain big fish to take the bait. The people who had suddenly experienced panic realized that it was just a false alarm, so they gradually calmed down. Just now, they were filled with righteous indignation and couldn't wait to take a knife and cut the traitor into 1,000 pieces. But now that a large basin of ice water had been poured over them, they began to discuss hesitantly. Whether the traitor was killed or not wasn't that important for now. They had to ensure their own lives first. This strange phenomenon is so strange. Could it be some kind of ominous sign? I heard my grandfather say that every time there is snow in June, there will be a great injustice. What's with the thunder and the earthquake? Huh? Injustice? The evidence is already so conclusive. What injustice? I think it's the opposite. It's the demon inside his body that's causing mischief. Even before he dies, he wants to drag us to hell with him. Then this Xiao Qing is so vicious. Are we still going to kill him? What would happen if it caused another earthquake? Just now, I was almost trampled to death. It really scared me to death. Hey, you say His Majesty and the Empress are about to give the order to execute him. Suddenly, this earthquake came. Could it be that even the true dragon's aura can't suppress him? Or are we wrong? Is it the heavens that don't want him to? Shut up. What nonsense are you talking about? Do you want to die? Let's wait and see. Maybe it's just a coincidence. If you dare to say another word, I'll go home and beat you to death. It was like waiting for an arrow that could come at any time. Everyone was on edge, afraid that it would come in the next instant and pierce through their heads. However, after waiting for a long time, it still didn't come. They were burning with anxiety. After waiting for the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the Yang Chengwai arched their backs and cleaned up all the snakes, insects, rats, and ants in the chaos. They still hadn't caught the fish they imagined. Seeing the people become restless again, Empress Chao's face darkened, and she sneered. Playing this kind of trick with me is showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. You won't come out, right? Then I'll kill him for you to see. Let's see who has the initiative. Your Majesty, it's getting late. It's time for this farce to end, don't you think? Heaven's Choice Emperor coughed a few times. This long wait made him extremely tired. He waved his hand and said, Jean is not feeling well. Let the Empress handle it for Jean. Good. The criminal, Xiahou Qing, was a descendant of the evil god and possessed by the evil spirit. After committing such a heinous crime, he actually dared to provoke the abnormal phenomenon of heaven and earth to bring disaster to the human world. Today, fortunately, His Majesty's golden dragon was present, and the Emperor's chi could restrain the evil spirit. If they did not kill him today, great you would perish. Someone come, put that Xiahou Qing on the fire and burn this evil spirit to ashes, completely exterminating him. Yes! Yang Chengwai obeyed the order and began to set up the fire platform. Bundles of firewood were piled on top of the platform, and in the middle of the platform, a wooden stick about a zhang high was erected. The iron lock was ready. All they had to do was to wait for the people to serve the feast. Today, he had personally put his old enemy on the platform. Xiao Yinyi's heart churned for a moment. He did not know why, but he felt somewhat emotional. Heir, do you still remember the first time we fought? At that time, you entered and left the palace. I was a fallen prince, and you were the only legitimate son of Nanping Wang Manor. All the imperial brothers gathered around you. They treated you better than me, their own brother, just to fight for you, their greatest support. The cold iron chain bound his hands and feet, round and round. Xiahou Qing weakly hung his head and smiled weakly. If it was now, the situation would be completely different. Your Highness's brothers would not be able to avoid me in time. Is your Highness saying all this to send me off? Then I'll accept your Highness' good intentions. Chapter 773. Xiao Yinyi looked at him with a complicated gaze, pausing for a moment before continuing in a low voice. At that time, I was watching coldly from the sidelines. Do you know what I was thinking? I am envious of you. You obviously have a cold face and don't say anything, but you are surrounded by a group of imperial brothers. If I were the crown prince, and you were the crown prince of Great Yu, how good would that be? But I was also jealous. Why did I have to live like a dog when I clearly had the most noble bloodline in the world, flaunting in front of you? The trace of blood hanging from Xiahou Qing's mouth gradually dried up, making it more difficult for him to speak. Your Highness is thinking too much. At that time, I was young and naturally liked silence. When I first entered the palace, I didn't know what to say and could only keep my mouth shut. I know. I could tell at a glance that you didn't want to talk to anyone at all. You wanted to stay far away from them and run to the side to bask in the sun. That's why when Third Brother suggested a polo match, you frowned. However, Third Brother insisted on it and even pulled Imperial Father over to watch the match. Imperial Father asked you who you wanted to be on the team with. He didn't expect you to turn around and point at me in the corner. What was more unexpected was that you and I cooperated so well and won the first place, pressing the other brothers firmly below. Everyone was shocked and took the jade pendant that Father used as a prize. That was the first time in many years that I caught Father's eye. What I didn't expect the most was that a few days after I happily took the jade pendant, I encountered the crazy revenge of the other brothers. Does your Highness blame my unintentional actions for disturbing your Highness's low profile for so many years? Xiao Yinyi shook his head, smiling faintly. No, I don't blame you. On the contrary, I want to thank you. If it wasn't for you, perhaps I would still be a coward who only knows how to hide in his shell to save his life. In fact, at the beginning of the match, I didn't want to be in the limelight. I was used to lowering my head, and even occasionally raising it felt uncomfortable. But your light was so bright that I didn't know why a fire was lit in my heart, and it made me crazy. You hit a ball, but I wanted to hit one more than you to prove that I didn't succumb to your halo. Because of you, I was forced to cut my umbilical cord and come to Imperial Mother's side after being framed by Imperial Concubine Chi. It can be said that it is because of your existence that I am who I am now. I had a great time playing polo with you. Xiao Yuni had hidden this psychological analysis in his heart for more than 3,000 days and nights. He thought that he would never say it out loud, but he did not expect that he would feel so happy after saying it out loud today, as if he had let out a breath of relief. A trivial matter in the past, brought up again after so many years, suddenly seemed like a mirage, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Qing laughed and said, "Move the sun, command the blue sky." Now that I think about it, that match was indeed delightful. You're welcome. The rope was already fastened, and the pile of firewood was set up properly. Buckets of hot oil quickly soaked the pile of firewood. Xiao Yuni took the torch from his subordinate, his dark eyes silently reflecting Xiao Qing's weak body. He said, "This life is over. I'm looking forward to fighting with the Crown Prince again if there's a chance in my next life. At that time, we'll be enemies and see who's stronger." Light the fire. The flame was like a snake's tongue, instantly lighting the firewood. It slithered towards Xiao Qing's feet, eagerly licking his robe. Everyone stared with wide eyes, excitedly clapping their hands while holding their breaths. They waited for a living body to burn into a skeleton in front of them, giving off the smell of flesh and would being burned to ashes. It was as if their souls had been burned. Chao Ho gripped Tianze Emperor's arm tightly, almost crushing it through the dragon robe. Her life's hatred would finally dissipate at this moment. She was so excited that tears almost came out of her eyes. This time, she had personally ordered people to set up the fire. Don't think that your tricks will have a chance to stir up trouble again. Burn, 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 burn to your heart's content. Just as the fire was about to engulf Xiao Qing, suddenly, a sharp shout pierced through the sea of people. "Your Majesty!" Not good. Just now when the ground was shaking, the mountain rocks at Xiangori Mountain suddenly splashed everywhere, and dust filled the sky. After everything calmed down, a few big bloody words suddenly appeared on the body of the Buddha guarding Xiangori Mountain. Tianze Emperor blurted out. What words were written? "The Crown Prince has returned." Chapter 774. With the return of the Crown Prince, there was a huge commotion. Oh, Crown Prince? There is no Crown Prince in this dynasty. Then this Crown Prince can only be that big madman from the previous dynasty? But didn't everyone say that the ghost of that crazy Crown Prince is in Xiao Shizi's body? Why did he return? What's going on? While everyone was still in shock, a horse galloped over like a bolt of lightning and shouted, reporting, after the earthquake in Hugua Temple, the lotus flowers in front of the temple withered in an instant, revealing a Buddha's headstone from the bottom of the pond. On the back of the stone, there were 4 words written, "Bathing in fire will emerge." Xiao Yuni, who was watching the fire from a close distance, was stunned for a moment with the fire still burning in his hand. Then he instantly understood. But before he could say anything, an endless stream of reporting came from all directions, fiercely attacking the weak minds of the people. Reporting, "Your Majesty, something happened at the Imperial Ancestral Temple. Emperor Gaozu's portrait burned without any wind." Reporting, "All the fish in Prunlai Lake are dead." Reporting, this continuous reporting was like a bomb exploding among the people. Chao Ho wanted to order people to calm the panic at all costs, but the galloping horse's hooves suppressed all the voices she had hidden among the people. Heavens! Heavens! An earthquake has caused so many ominous signs. This is clearly a sign from the heavens. warning us that if people are really burned to death, that crazy crown prince will be able to do whatever he wants after breaking free from his physical body. If this is true, then it will be terrible. Don't burn it. Don't burn it. Right? Don't burn it. Don't burn it. Let him live. Let him live. Seeing that the people's screams were getting louder and louder, they rushed towards the fire. Even the guards who had drawn their swords could not stop them. Seeing that the situation was about to go out of control, Tianze Emperor had no choice but to stand up and order, extinguish the fire. Bring him out for Zhen. If he is burned to death, it is your life. Yuni, what are you doing? We are talking about you. Even though the torch in his hand was extremely unwilling, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he had no choice but to suppress the anger in his heart. Gritting his teeth, he waved his veiny hand and ordered his subordinates. Didn't you hear Imperial Father's words? Drag him out. I want him alive. Yes. These people, who had just spent a lot of effort to set up the fire, now swarmed over to put out the fire and save Xiahou Qing at the risk of being burned to death. Their armor was scorched and they were in a sorry state. Several of them were scalded before they managed to unlock the iron lock and drag Xiahou Qing out. The flame had already reached his feet and was climbing up his robe. Splash! He splashed a basin of cold water over it in a panic, as if he was trying to save his own father. Xiao Yuni frowned and looked down with a cold expression. How is she? The vice envoy stretched out 2 fingers to check for breathing. Still breathing. The veins on Xiao Yuni's hand almost exploded. He shook off his hand and turned to bow to Heaven Choice Emperor expressionlessly. Reporting to Imperial Father, Xiahou Qing's life is not in danger. Heaven Choice Emperor sighed and sat back down. That's good, that's good. Just 2 short sentences made him extremely tired. He turned back to look at Xiaohou. Empress, what should we do now? You should make the decision. Killing was not something that could be done now. Otherwise, the public opinion would not be suppressed. Since the person behind the scenes had arranged so many tricks, once Xiahou Qing died, there would be more and more movements. Then when the time came, whoever gave the order to kill Xiahou Qing would be the enemy of the people. She had arranged for the saber to stab at Xiahou Qing, but she never expected it to stab back at her with the same move. Who was the person who had directed all of this? Ningshu? Did she not die? That was impossible. She had seen her corpse lying in front of her with her own eyes and then told Yuni to take care of that rotten corpse. But if it was not her, who else could it be? Unless Xiao Yuni's expression was extremely dark as he stared at Xiahou Qing, who had escaped death once again. Before he could figure out what to do next, he suddenly felt his eyelid twitch and saw his mother's cold gaze landing on him. Chapter 775. Xiao Yuni subconsciously quibbled. Imperial Mother. He hadn't even finished his sentence when he saw a thin figure pushing through the crowd. He walked out of the vast sea of people. A bright yellow scroll was held high above his head. It seemed as if he was holding the mountains and rivers of the Great Yu. Someone in the crowd quickly recognized him. It's Prime Minister Tan. It's really him. It's our Tan Qingtian. Move aside, move aside. The crowd automatically moved aside to make a path for him. Tan Shiwan? Chao Ho's eyes temporarily let go of Xiao Yuni and locked on a Tan Shiwan with hostility, guessing what new play this old man had to perform. Tianze Emperor spoke first, his face cold. Minister Tan, we remember that you have been cultivating in the mountains recently. Why did you suddenly come down? If it's not important, then let's talk about it when we return to the palace. Tan Shiwan did not back down and instead said fearlessly, reporting to your majesty, the matter this subject wants to report is not a small matter, but an important matter that concerns the future of the country. As your majesty knows, this subject knew that he had committed a grave mistake and became a monk. He meditated on his mistakes and repented in front of Buddha. He should not have taken half a step into the world of mortals. However, when the earth moved, this subject was kneeling in front of Emperor Gaozu's statue. When the earth suddenly moved, this subject panicked and was afraid that Emperor Gaozu's statue would shatter. So I immediately called for people to protect you. However, before I could touch the golden statue, I suddenly saw a bright yellow scroll fall from the sleeve of the great ancestor and land at my feet. I was extremely frightened and did not dare to be negligent in the slightest. I rushed down the mountain to see His Majesty. "Your Majesty, please take a look." Chao Ho looked at the scroll as if he was looking at a bomb that he knew would explode. He said angrily, "What a joke! Emperor Gaozu's statue is made of pure gold and is solid inside. How could it drop a scroll for no reason? This is ridiculous." Tan Xuan said bitterly, "Your Majesty's thoughts are also this subject's thoughts. It's because this subject understands that I feel even more terrified and uneasy." When the scroll fell, this subject immediately asked everyone present whether this subject's eyes were blurred or if this subject's mind was muddled and fell for a trick. However, everyone present can testify that this subject did not see wrongly. "Your Majesty, Your Highness, please take a look." Minister Tan, with a swoosh, Xiao Yuni flew away. Before he could even touch a corner of the yellow silk, the scroll had already been opened to everyone. The dazzling cinnabar words on it connected together, causing a huge commotion in an instant. Since ancient times, the emperors have succeeded the heavens and established the extremes, consolidating the vast regions. They must establish the Yuan dynasty and the Maolong kingdom as their foundation, and use the Mianzong society as their boundless resting place. But when heaven chooses the sun and moon to be in chaos, the purple myrtle dimmed, it no longer disrupted the rivers and mountains. I personally descend to the mortal world to give you some pointers. The eldest son of the emperor is young. His appearance is outstanding. His innate talent is pure and beautiful. He can inherit the country. I solemnly declare to heaven and earth that it will continue for another 100 years to mend the defects and remedy them. Tan Xuan read it aloud, each word ringing in everyone's ears. For a moment, no one was able to react. A great uproar came like a tide. Just like that, the ugliest piece of the royal family's fig leaf was taken off in front of countless people. When Heaven Chooses Emperor heard it personally, his face changed color and he suddenly stood up. Empress Chao's face was ashen, her jeweled golden armor shattered. The commoners were all stunned. What eldest son of the emperor is young? Our Majesty's oldest prince is only the third Prince Xiao Yunyan. Where did the eldest son come from? What is written in this imperial edict? Who says there is no eldest son of the emperor? 22 years ago, His Majesty suffered from a lack of children, and the crown prince was left vacant. The current empress and the most favored imperial concubine Jiang at that time were pregnant with a dragon child one after the other. His Majesty was unable to make a choice, so he made a golden promise that no matter which imperial concubine gave birth to a dragon child first, he would be conferred the title of crown prince and inherit our great Yu's vast rivers and mountains. Who would have expected that accidents would occur so frequently that neither of the two dragon children could be saved, so the position of crown prince has been left vacant until today. What does this imperial edict mean? The eldest son of the emperor from back then didn't die at all. If he didn't die, then who is it? Stupid. How come you still don't understand? The sun and moon to be in chaos, the purple myrtle star to be in darkness. The eldest son of the emperor is young. It's talking about the Nanping Prince Xiaoqing, who was almost burned to death just now. Huh? Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Chapter 776. Seeing all kinds of conjectures being made, Chao Ho could not bear it any longer. He angrily flicked his sleeves and stood up, saying coldly, "What eldest imperial son?" This consort's eldest imperial son was unfortunately killed by a scoundrel before he was even born and returned to Tianming. Now, he is still buried in the imperial mausoleum. Everyone knows about this. Where did the other eldest imperial son come from? This is simply absurd and ridiculous. Prime Minister Tan, His Majesty, and this consort have given you some face because you have served the court for many years and shared His Majesty's burdens. If you continue to spread such absurd rumors here, don't blame this consort for being impolite. Your Highness, What this subject has recited is all from the imperial edict. Not a single word has been exaggerated. If your highness does not believe me, you can look it over yourself. Imperial edict? It can only be called an imperial edict when it is written by the imperial family and stamped with a golden seal. Such a thing of unknown origin is clearly made up by you. Speak, Tan Shiyuan. What is your purpose in coming here today? Or have you been in cahoots with this sorcerer for a long time and want to ruin my Xiao family's country? Chao Ho's words were like hammers that fiercely smashed at Tan Shiyuan. He wanted nothing more than to immediately drag this old man out and tear him apart. Tan Shiyuan, this consort will give you one more chance. If you admit your wrongs in time, this consort and his majesty can be lenient. Otherwise, don't blame this consort for not remembering our old friendship. Facing the murderous Yang Chengwei that invisibly gathered around him, Tan Shiyuan was not afraid at all. Your Majesty, Your Highness, and all the people present, this old subject dares to guarantee with his life that this old subject has not made up a single word of this imperial edict. If you do not believe it, there is the simplest way to verify it. Dripping water to identify family. If it is proven that His Majesty and Xiahou Qing's blood can mix, then the truth will be revealed. Tan Shiyuan's words were like a fierce slap that instantly stunned the Emperor-Empress. Xiao Yunyi's expression suddenly changed. The web between his thumb and forefinger pressed tightly against the hilt of his sword. His eyes were like swords and filled with killing intent. He did his best to restrain himself. Chao Ho's anger erupted like a volcano after being brutally attacked. He gritted his teeth and said, Tan Shiyuan, what are your intentions? How could he say such absurd words? Firstly, everyone knows that Xiahou Qing is the only legitimate son of the Nanping mansion. When he was born, he asked the imperial court to confer him the title of heir apparent. Today, you say that he is His Majesty's son, and you want His Majesty to listen to your command in front of the people and do a blood test. Where do you place His Majesty's respect? How abominable! Secondly, His Majesty has been unwell recently and has been bedridden. I wish I could persuade His Majesty to return to the temporary imperial residence to recuperate. However, His Majesty simply cannot let go of the state affairs and the people and has repeatedly rejected my suggestion. Now, he is barely able to keep up with the state affairs and is forcing himself to handle the state affairs. I accompany His Majesty every day, and my heart aches endlessly. His Majesty is the foundation of the imperial court. If something happens to His Majesty, how long do you think the world will be at peace? Now, you want to share His Majesty's burden, and you want to force His Majesty to damage his dragon body. Tan Shiyuan. Oh, Tan Shiyuan, your heart is simply punishable. Someone come. What are you still standing there for? Why aren't you taking this old thief down for me? When Xiao Yunyi received the order, he immediately rushed forward with a cold face. With a light wave of his hand that was covered with saber scars and sword calluses, dozens of guards swarmed forward. After being restrained by the guards, the yellow handkerchief in his hand was snatched away. Before his mouth was covered, Tan Shiyuan shouted loudly, Your Highness, you are wrong. The blood test only needs a drop of dragon blood to verify, so how could it harm His Majesty's foundation? If it is not tested, the people will always be suspicious. Could it be that His Majesty and Your Highness are afraid of something? Your Highness, look up. So many people are looking at you. What are you afraid of? Shut up. What is there to be afraid of between His Majesty and this consort? This consort has given you time and time again, but you are still saying alarmist words to scare people and confuse them. Kill. Kill this old man for this consort. Chapter 777. While Empress Chao was furious, Xiao Yunyi frowned sharply and then glanced at the deputy general behind him. The deputy general understood and immediately nodded and quietly left the Meridian Gate. The people at the Meridian Gate witnessed Empress Chao wanting to poison Tan Shiyuan and were instantly silent. Then, they heard a young child's voice suddenly ring in the crowd. I'm an orphan of the Hanjiang Prefecture. Back then, there was a drought at my place. My parents both died. If it weren't for Prime Minister Tan, my entire place would have died. Prime Minister Tan is my benefactor. I beg the Empress not to kill him." A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Tan Shiyuan's past achievements were quickly recited by the people. The pain and grievances that had been pacified and the kindness that he had received. The scenes of the past appeared in front of them like pages of a book, making people's eyes turn red and their hearts ache. He was the first to kneel down. "Prime Minister Tan can't die." "Yes, Prime Minister Tan is a good person and has done so many good things for us. Your Majesty, please show mercy and spare Prime Minister Tan's life. Please, Your Majesty. Please, Your Majesty." Tens of thousands of people bowed and bent their knees like a tide, kneeling together. After Qin Xin and Xiao Yuan finished speaking, they quickly lowered their heads and also knelt on the ground. They were drowned in the crowd. Looking at the crowd kneeling in front of her and hearing the tsunami of pleas, Empress Chao was held up in midair by the people's will. The humiliation of being forced to personally order the execution of her elder brother not long ago flashed before her eyes once again. Her overflowing anger caused her fingers to tremble. "Good." She gritted her teeth and forced out the words one by one with a cold smile. "That's great." At the same time, in a remote alley 10 miles away from the Meridian Gate, Ning Shu and Hui Mo could be seen from afar. They lowered their bodies and urged their horses to gather at the entrance of the alley. Behind them, dozens of guards with cotton on their horses followed closely behind. The remaining hundreds of people followed in batches and gathered at the Meridian Gate from other directions. Ning Shu said, "Is everything done? Is there anyone injured?" Hui Mo smiled proudly. "Of course. Don't you know how skilled our brothers are? These things are a piece of cake. Don't worry." Ning Shu nodded. "Thank you for your hard work, brothers. Next is the battle at the Meridian Gate. The Prime Minister is waiting for us there." Xiao Yuni knew that I was still alive, and he knew that I would definitely rush over. Therefore, they will definitely send people to intercept and kill us. This journey is bound to be extremely dangerous, and we will be attacked at any time. We have to be fast. Faster. Well, no problem. Hui Mo blinked his eyes and waved the horsewhip in his hand. The young man was in high spirits and was unstoppable. Ning Shu also smiled. Suddenly, her eyelids twitched. An instinctive premonition made her turn to the side. She saw a cold arrow flying through the air, brushing past her shoulder. Her eyes sharpened as she looked at the rows of hidden soldiers at the end of the alley. She pulled out a sword that she had prepared in advance from the side of the horse and smiled playfully at Hui Mo. "You see, speak of Chow Chow, and Chow Chow is here. Good things don't come true, but bad things do. We may win or lose this trip. I don't have the slightest guarantee in my heart. If we don't come back, aren't you afraid?" Hui Mo also pulled out his sword and cut the neck of the first soldier who rushed over. The splashing blood was sprinkled on the back of his hand. He tilted his head and scratched his ear carelessly. "What? Afraid? Life is not to live happily. If we don't come back, then we won't come back. Now, I will kill to my heart's content." Chapter 778. Because of the trial at Meridian Gate, except for those who were used to working to support their families, all the people who were free gather around Meridian Gate to watch the fun. In this long alley, there is no sound of people. There is only the sound of swords colliding, friction, and finally the sound of necks being cut and chests being pierced. With tears in his eyes, Hui Mo closes the eyes of a dead brother and stabs the enemy's chest with his sword. One by one, they fell, and another one rushed up to replace them. They slaughtered their way from one alley to another. This long road of 5 kilometers was actually paved with blood at every step. 10 miles, 8 miles, 3 miles. More and more brothers had died, and the people around them were getting fewer and fewer. Ning Shu's face was already covered in tears, but she had no choice but to harden her heart and charge forward. Otherwise, all her efforts would be in vain, and all her sacrifices today would be in vain. The Fergana horse she was riding on still had both of its hooves chopped off after it had nimbly dodged several black hands. Ning Shu fell heavily from the horse, her arm touching the ground. Half of her body was scratched with blood, and her cheeks were dyed red. Hui Mo turns around and calls, "Lady Ning!" Ning Shu doesn't care about it. She climbs up from the ground and avoids the sword. She wraps the sword in the enemy's hand with her whip. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, blood for blood. I'm fine. Now everyone is holding on to their last breath. Hui Mo grits his teeth and says, "There are only 2 miles left. Lady Ning, take my horse away. We will hold them here. Hurry up." "But you, don't worry. I won't die. Hui Mo, promise you with my life that next time I will see you alive. There is no time to talk nonsense. Hurry up, I beg you. Young master is waiting for you." Hui Mo whistles. The old horse that has been with him for many years runs to Ning Shu and bends its head. Ning Shu takes a last look at her brothers. She grits her teeth and resolutely jumps on the horse. "Go!" She doesn't look back. Her tears are thrown in the wind. Hui Mo smiles and leads the last dozens of brothers to protect her. They use their bodies to completely block the way. Blood is like flowers, dyeing the blue sky red. The short journey of 2 miles had never felt so long. It was as if his life had been torn into countless pieces, and each piece was infinitely stretched. It was as if he would never reach the end of this journey. She gradually heard the hubbub of voices in front of her. Ning Shu jumped down from the horse's back and put on a black cloak to cover her face. She bent down and imitated the old woman's gait, moving forward quickly while avoiding the eyes and ears. Every step she took was like stepping on the edge of a knife, stepping on Xiahou Qing's fragile string of life. Her heart was beating like crazy, almost jumping out of her throat. She knew it was almost there, almost there. She kept counting in her heart. Only 2 more bends, and she would reach the Meridian Gate. Before she could get excited, a cold figure suddenly appeared around the corner and blocked her way. He was also wearing a cloak. The man's face was cold, and his cold eyes stared at her pitilessly. "You want to go there? It's not that easy." With a thump, Ning Shu's heart fell into an abyss. They were so close, as if they were separated into 2 worlds. On the Meridian Gate, the noise reached its peak. The people's petition had completely angered Chao Ho. The first time, the second time, in such a short period of time, she was slapped twice by such a similar trick. Chao Ho was furious. However, the public opinion could not be quelled. Chao Ho took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. She suddenly smiled and glanced at Xiao Yuni. Xiao Yuni understood and looked up, waving his hand lightly in a certain direction. None of the people present had expected what happened next. An arrow was aimed at His Majesty, and Chao Ho protected him with her life. The Meridian Gate was in chaos. Xiao Yuni raised his troops and shouted, "The guilty official, Tan Shiyuan, colluded with the traitor, Xiahou Qing, to assassinate His Majesty. Men, behead him and his accomplices." Chapter 779. "Wait!" A delicate shout sounded from the corner of the Meridian Gate, disrupting the ending of the story once again. Chao Ho was extremely annoyed, his eyes filled with uncontrollable murderous intent. Xiao Yuni's heart skipped a beat. He turned back, but it was not the familiar one. He narrowed his eyes suspiciously, looking at the delicate girl in a pink palace gown walking over from afar. Little 13th? The silver light sword that was an inch out of its scabbard returned to its original position quietly. The copper buckles on his riding boots clanked loudly. He walked over with a cold expression and scolded the girl sternly. "This is the Meridian Gate, where father and mother deal with important matters of the country. The people are watching. It's not a place for you to play. Go back quickly." Xiao Zhangping did not care, pursing her lips at him on purpose, tilting her head and rolling her eyes. "Brother, why are you so fierce? You scared me to death." "It's because I know that father and mother have important matters of the country to deal with that Chongping dares to disturb you." She stood on her tiptoes and said loudly, "Father, mother, look, who did I catch when I was strolling outside today? She's the biggest unsolved case in the palace. Father and mother, you must reward Ken heavily." Akan has made a great contribution to the court. She giggled as she pulled out a person from the carriage behind her. Xiao Yuni instinctively felt that something was wrong, but before he could stop her, Xiao Zhongping had already reached out his hand and pulled off the black cloak covering that person's head in front of Xiao Yuni's shocked eyes. A pale and small face rushed into everyone's eyes like a witch. She was still beautiful. Her body was still splattered with uneven blood, like a pomegranate flower that was in full bloom. However, if you looked at her carefully, you would find that she was even more determined than before. It was as if she had endured countless hardships and refined her body into a diamond. No matter how strong the wind and rain were, she would not be easily smashed. The people in the front row immediately took 3 steps back in shock, and there was an uproar. Ningshu? Isn't this the jinx of the Ning family, Ningshu? Isn't she already dead? I saw with my own eyes that a few days ago, the entrance of the public house was hung with white flowers. No, didn't they say that Xiaoho went crazy and stabbed her to death? A few days ago, the official documents that were posted everywhere said the same thing. His Majesty took pity on her and granted a cemetery to the House of Duke. Her body was buried there. How is she still alive? Good heavens! Good heavens! This is a true resurrection from the dead. Xiao Yuni stared fixedly at Ningshu, his words seeming to have been dug out from the abyss, every word stained with invisible blood. You want to send me to my death in order to save him? Hearing his voice, Ningshu looked up quietly, but did not look at him. Instead, she took a step forward to look at the emperor, the empress, the people, the whole world, and finally met Xiao Ho's eyes calmly. Provoked by that gaze, Xiao Ho's wrist trembled violently for a moment. She looked at Xiao Yuni angrily, the question in her eyes enough to crush a person. Xiao Yuni bent his knees and fell to the ground. Akan is incompetent. Mother, please punish me. The corners of Xiao Ho's mouth twitched, and she suddenly looked up and laughed. My son, get up. How is it that you're incompetent? His Majesty and I saw with our own eyes that the Ning family's daughter died in vain. This woman who suddenly appeared is clearly not Ningshu. She's a witch in disguise. Speak. Who on earth are you? What are you trying to do by sneaking into the Meridian Gate today? Chapter 780. Seeing the undisguised killing intent in Xiao Ho's eyes, Ningshu immediately understood her intentions. She smiled knowingly and bent her knees to bow. Nyang Yang is wise. My daughter did indeed stop breathing at that time. His Majesty and Nyang Yang pitied my daughter and specially gave her a grand funeral. My daughter was endlessly grateful in the 9 underworlds. However, when my soul entered the yellow world, and I was queuing up on the spring bridge of helplessness to wait for Meng Pasup, something strange happened. A black gold god suddenly appeared above my head and brought me into a boundless hall. In the hall, a black-faced, bronze-eyed, golden-crowned king of hell was sitting in the hall, waiting for me with a book in his hand. I was only a little demon. When I saw him, I was so shocked that my entire body trembled. I asked him what crime I committed and asked him to let me go. However, he was very merciful. He ordered me to get up and threw the book in his hand in front of me. He said, "Originally, my time in the mortal world has come to an end. My soul should indeed return to the netherworld. However, there is an important matter in the mortal world that has yet to be settled. I must send someone to deal with it." He casually flipped through the book and found that although my daughter was careless and intelligent, she wasn't too stupid. With a little guidance, she would still be useful. Thus, he pointed his golden finger at my daughter to complete this task. However, my daughter was frightened when she heard this. My physical body is already damaged. If I suddenly return to the Yang world, won't I be treated like a demon and dealt with? Who knows? I might die soon after returning to the Yang world. That would be a living torture. No, how could I do that? Ningshu's narration was vivid and lifelike, and her expression was even more sincere and unrestrained. The unrelated audience could not help but be startled. Only the half-dead Xiao Qing suddenly heard the extremely familiar soft and firm voice amidst the ringing in his ears. The corners of his lips curled up slightly in a doting manner. Ning Shu couldn't see him clearly from afar, but the moment she saw his figure, she smiled as if they had a tacit understanding. She continued this great play with ulterior motives. King Yama said, "Don't be afraid. I'll bestow you with a treasure. When you return to the mortal world, if anyone suspects you, take this treasure out. It can eliminate all evil in the mortal world." As Ning Shu spoke, she took out something from her bosom. It was a small Buddhist pagoda carved out of pure gold with a crystal glaze in the middle. There was no Buddha on the pagoda, but it made people's souls tremble. They felt like they were covered in filth and wanted to bow their heads in repentance. In the middle of the crystal, there was a simple white stone. It was dim, but countless people's knees went weak the moment they saw it, and they fell to the ground. "Buddha? Buddha bone relic?" Xiaobin was stunned and blurted out. Ning Shu looked back and smiled faintly. "That's right. This is the 8th of the 8 relics that Gautama Buddha scattered around after he passed away, and no one has been able to find it even after searching the mountains and rivers." She put the pagoda back into her clothes and continued her story. "I asked again, 'May I ask why King Yama sent me back to the mortal world?' King Yama sighed and grabbed another book from the void. It flew into my hand and said, 'It's because the imperial family in the mortal world is about to fall. If we don't intervene in time, the dynasty will be destroyed. When the time comes, the mortal world will be in chaos and the people will be plunged into misery and suffering. How many innocent souls will be added? There will be so many that my little hell can't squeeze them in. It will be comparable to the Battle of Chongping. I will reconstruct a fresh body for you. I wish you to return to the mortal world, reunite with your family, and reveal the truth to the world." Although this little girl was timid in her heart, when she thought about how her parents and brother were still alive, she really couldn't bear to part with them. Thus, she gritted her teeth and stomped her feet, accepting King Yinluo's conditions. She really had no choice but to come back and get involved in this mess. Sigh. Chapter 781. Ah, King of Hell? Underworld? Coming back from the dead? What a bunch of lies you've made up. I've finally seen it clearly. Everything that happened today was all set up by you. How dare you? How dare you try to control His Majesty and the entire royal family? You demoness, you deserve to die. With a swoosh, countless arrows were aimed at her heart. As long as Empress Chao gave the order, she would immediately be shot into a sieve with bloody holes all over her body. Being exposed to the range of so many arrows, the surrounding people were so frightened that their faces turned pale and their hearts trembled. They hurriedly rolled and crawled far away, wanting to save their lives. Some were so frightened that their legs turned to jelly and they knelt on the ground with a thud. They were dragged away by their companions. The word "die" was stripped of all disguises and was directly plastered on Ning Shu's forehead. Xiao Qing's heart tightened. He forced himself to take a breath and shouted with blood in his mouth, "Shu-er." It was just 2 short words, but there were countless unfinished words that he wanted to say after that. Together with the hot blood, they crashed in her ears and dripped onto her heart. How could Ning Shu not know what he wanted to say? But she couldn't bear to say anything. She looked at him and smiled, blinking playfully. "Hey, I'm here. Did you hear that? I'm here. Don't worry. I'm never afraid of death. If I really die, then I die. Anyway, I'm here to die with you today." One was self-righteous, and the other thought that she was smart. They were perfectly matched together. How fated was that? Just like that, she laughed heartily under countless murderous gazes and coldness. She laughed so hard that Xiao Zhongping's heart clenched and the corners of his skirt were torn. She laughed so hard that Xiao Yunyi's face turned steely and the veins on the back of his hand popped. She laughed so hard that the officials and people watching felt their backs turn dark and cold. She laughed so hard that Empress Chao was furious and murderous. When her laughter subsided, she slowly wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said without hesitation, "Whether my daughter is real or not, whether she is dead or alive, whether she is a lie or not, whether she is real or not, whether she is dead or alive, whether she is a lie or not. None of these matters. In any case, my daughter has already died once, and dying again is nothing more than practice makes perfect. Doesn't your majesty want to hear what the king of hell told me? What if it's really a big secret that can affect the fate of our country? For example, is it related to that Empress Zhou, who covered the sky with one hand and was spurned by the people 25 years ago? From the moment she appeared today, unpredictable words came out of her mouth one after another, each one able to make people dizzy. Ning Shu's words were like a drill, a long string of words coming out in rapid succession. She did not leave any leeway. She unceremoniously exposed the secret they wanted to hide the most and tore off their last piece of cloth. Your Majesty is so angry. Is it because you're worried that the people will know that the secret of Empress Zhou's death was a big conspiracy? Just like the most evil and unbearably poisonous plum blossom's kiss that you inherited. Gasps could be heard coming from the mouths of the commoners. Everyone was scared out of their wits, but it also aroused the hidden passion of countless people. That fervor was too strong. It was like dry firewood with oil added to it. The fuse had already been lit, and no matter how they pounced on it, it was useless. Who in the Great Yu dynasty was not afraid of the plum blossom's poison? It was the most terrifying thing in the world that could kill people without leaving a trace. It was rumored that even the previous emperor had died from this poison, causing people to tremble in fear. But what did that Ning girl just say? That kind of terrifying thing was actually in the hands of the current empress. What could be more terrifying than this news? Chapter 782. Chao Ho's voice was torn as she angrily said, What nonsense are you talking about? What Buddha's bone relic? What resurrection from the dead? They are all tricks to mislead people. Bengong has not killed you yet because Bengong is benevolent. If you continue to be an alarmist, Bengong doesn't mind having you immediately sacrifice blood to Meridian Gate. Ning Shu did not back down and immediately went for the kill. Her voice was swift and steady, with a power that could not be refuted. Alarmist? Wasn't the reason why Her Highness had lost her composure like this because my daughter had exposed the secret at the bottom of her heart? 22 years ago, you and Imperial concubine Jiang gave birth on the same day. Your son was born stillborn. Imperial concubine Jiang's child was clearly healthy, but because she was worried about your revenge, she had no choice but to escape from the palace. But she was still intercepted by you. Before the palace maid died, she met a person who accidentally saved the eldest son's life. That person was my mother. So all these years, you have held a grudge against my mother and me, and started your long revenge. Following Ning Shu's crisp words, Princess Hexin slowly walked out from the crowd with Ning Deyuan's support and stood behind Ning Shu. Ning Shu looked at them deeply with tears in her eyes. Princess Hexin smiled and wiped away the tears on her face. She shook her head and used the loudest and firmest voice she had ever used in her life to say, That's right, I can vouch for this with my life. The old people accompanying me also saw it with their own eyes. There was a short gasp from the crowd. Chao Ho's eyes were faintly red when the most disgusting past was forcefully mentioned. She suppressed her anger and sneered. What a joke. Your family is in cahoots. You testify? It's ridiculous. You are clearly lying for her. Bengong has seen it clearly. Your entire Duke's Fu is a traitor. Being called a nest of traitors, Ning Shu was not angry. Instead, she was even more indifferent. She used her pair of crystal-clear eyes to coldly look at the ugliness in front of her, since you don't recognize my mother as a witness. The girl had no choice but to continue. Let me think, the next one should be from 25 years ago. Back then, eldest princess Xiao Mingxue colluded with your highness for her own personal gain and poisoned the crown prince Xiao Minglu together, causing him to go crazy. Empress Zhou had no choice but to burn herself to death in the name of righteousness. And before she burned herself to death, wasn't the last person to see her your highness the empress? You thought that after all the witnesses were killed, no one in this world would know about it, but there was one left. The corner of Chow Ho's eyes twitched, but he quickly concealed it. He raised his chin and sneered. Who? Something that didn't happen at all? What kind of monster are you trying to fabricate to deceive the people? Let me tell you, that's impossible. Those people are all your accomplices. Ning Shu curled her lips into a secret smile and said, You'll know about this person later. Chow Ho thought that she had a guilty conscience and was pretending to be mysterious. That's right. She had done everything in such a secretive manner back then. Every single person who had seen her enter the Phoenix Terrace had been sent to the underworld by her elder brother, and every single corpse had been carefully checked. Whatever she, Chow Wenyu, wanted to do, she would never overlook. Most of the blockage in her heart was cleared, so she laughed loudly and said to Heaven's Choice Emperor, Your Majesty, did you hear that? You and I are generous and kind, but she used it as an opportunity to confuse the country. Now, this which can't continue. Her tricks are over, and her conspiracy has come to an end. Your Majesty, please give the order. Kill her. Kill everyone involved in this conspiracy, including the Duke's public house. Use your golden mouth and jade words to put an end to this absurd farce. Heaven's Choice Emperor nodded weakly. All right, Jin will listen to the Empress. He spoke halfway and suddenly coughed violently, coughing until his face turned purple. Seeing this, Chow Ho frowned and subconsciously stopped talking. She went forward to support him. Your Majesty, what's wrong? Are you hurt from anger? You are the Emperor of the 9 and 5. You can't let these dirty things affect your dragon body, right? Kai Bing, are you stupid? Hurry and bring the warm tea over for this consort. She helped Heaven's Choice Emperor, who was still coughing violently, and took the teacup to blow on it. Then she carefully fed it to Heaven's Choice Emperor. Heaven's Choice Emperor leaned against Chow Ho and drank a few mouthfuls of tea. Only then did he slowly calm down and his face regain some color. He let out a long sigh and held Chow Ho's hand. Jin is much better. I made the Empress worry. If Jean leaves you, what should I do? Chow Ho smiled and temporarily put everything aside. In front of all the people, she put on a perfect performance and said sincerely, Your Majesty, what nonsense are you talking about? Qinxie and Your Majesty are one. If Qinxie doesn't care about you, who should I care about? Heaven's Choice Emperor patted her hand and revealed a gentle smile. Yes. The Empress is right. You and I are husband and wife. Chow Ho also returned a polite smile. However, she suddenly had a strange feeling in her heart. Before she could figure out where this feeling came from, her eyes suddenly turned blood red. Some kind of sticky and hot liquid was suddenly squeezed out from Heaven's Choice Emperor's throat. It blurred her vision and dirted her entire face. Her surroundings were in an uproar. The voice that had been warm with her a moment ago exploded in her ears in the next moment with the most panicked roar in the world. Empress, why did you harm Jean? Chapter 783. An ear-piercing buzzing sound filled her mind. In that moment, Chow Ho could not hear anything. She could only stare blankly through the layer of blood as Heaven's Choice Emperor leaned back in front of her. His mouth was open as he used the most hateful tone in the world to speak to her. She did not even hear those words clearly, or even if she heard them clearly, she could not react in time. The blood on her face slowly slid down. Amidst the shocked cries of the people, she said in a daze, Your Majesty, what are you saying? This concubine did not. Someone come. The Empress is trying to assassinate the Emperor. Someone come and protect the Empress. Heaven's Choice Emperor leaned against Zhao Bin as he was quickly helped back away from the Empress. Xiao Yunyi's feet were frozen and the sword in his hand fell to the ground. Facing this scene, he did not know what to do. Heaven's Choice Emperor clutched his chest as more blood came out of his mouth. His eyes were red as he angrily pointed at her. His voice could not connect. Tea. That tea was poisoned. Empress, you were so cruel. Why did you plot against me? Your Majesty, wake up. Imperial Physician. Guards, quickly summon the Imperial Physician. Chao Ho unconsciously looked back at the tea that had spilled on the ground, and then looked up at Kai Bin, who she trusted the most. In the end, she numbly looked away and stared blankly at Heaven's Choice Emperor, who had fainted. In a flash, she suddenly understood what had happened. A great sense of absurdity swallowed her from head to toe. It was so absurd that she could not help but laugh. There were so many pairs of eyes around her, from the officials, from the common people, from the guards, from everyone. Every pair of eyes was like a mirror, reflecting her current sorry state. Ha ha! She, Chao Wenyu, had always thought that she was smart and had played everyone in the palm of her hand. She had never thought that the biggest idiot would be herself. What happened today was not a trial for him. Xiao Qing? It was clearly aimed at her, the so-called most respected woman in the Great Yu dynasty, the phoenix mother of the country, and carefully planned a bloody murder. She didn't have many trustworthy people left in this world. At most, there were 2.5. Her most trusted brother had already been killed by her own hands. Kai Bin, who had been by her side for decades, was a complete traitor. As for the last half, it was her husband. She had loved him all her life and hated him all her life, but she could not let him go. She wanted to accompany him until death. Even if she had to turn him into a puppet, she was not willing to let him go. However, these two puppets were willing to risk their lives to completely turn against each other and kill each other. She tilted her head and looked at the unconscious Heaven's Choice Emperor and whispered, "Your Majesty, how much do you hate me? You would rather exchange your life for mine?" Her chest suddenly felt hot, as if hot oil had rolled over it. The heat caused her chi and blood to surge up, and she suddenly spat out a large mouthful of blood. After spitting out the blood, she coldly raised her bright yellow sleeve and wiped away the sticky blood on her face. After wiping it clean, she suddenly thought of something. She looked in the direction of Xiao Qing through the crowd and laughed self-deprecatingly. "Oh, this Empress understands. What you want to exchange is not our lives, but that slut's child. Ha ha ha." This Empress painstakingly planned. But in the end, she still lost to you, Jiang Chiz. Ha ha, get lost for this Empress. This Empress has not lost yet. Uni, where's my son? Protect this Empress. And from today onwards, you will be the next Emperor of the Great Yu. Chapter 784. Empress Chao's shrill voice pierced the sky. She spread her arms and laughed at the sky, as arrogant as a demon. 25 years ago, this Empress will show how our beloved Majesty forced me to abdicate. Today, this Empress will show the past and let the people of the world feast their eyes on it. The tens of thousands of people and all the civil and military officials were stunned and panicked. Your Majesty, you can't. The old officials' knees trembled, their backs stiff as they spoke sincerely. However, what they received in return was a disdainful sneer. She didn't even bother to respond to them. So many trembling and scorching gazes landed on Xiao Yuni in shock. Withstanding those gasps of shock, the vein on Xiao Yuni's forehead twitched a few times. For the first time in 20 years, the scepter of fate had actually fallen into his hands. This feeling of destiny that had descended from the heavens made him stare blankly for a few moments. Then, the blood that had been forcefully suppressed and surging for many years surged and gushed out, causing even his eyes to turn red. He gritted his teeth and controlled his trembling back teeth. He said in the lowest voice, "I can't, yes." With Xiao Yuni's order, the elites of the Dragon City Guards under his command immediately turned their swords, and those who were hiding in the dark received the signal and rushed out from the alleys around the Meridian Gate, surrounding the entire Meridian Gate. Those old officials with gray hair had their backs pressed by the tips of swords. Zhao Bin held the unconscious Tian Zhe Emperor in tears. Kai Bin, who was running for her life, was shot in the shoulder by Yang Chengwei. She was dragged back to be tortured and humiliated by Empress Chao. In the crowd, the children's cries and screams resounded in everyone's ears. Everyone was terrified and felt threatened. However, when they saw the cold soldiers surrounding them, They hurriedly covered their mouths and only dared to let out uncontrollable sobs from their throats as tears flowed into their stomachs. The aura of a new dynasty fell on everyone's head so plainly. Witnessing this scene with her own eyes, Ning Shu's face paled, and she said in shock, "Xiao Yuni, do you know what you are doing?" Hearing Ning Shu's question, Xiao Yuni's back stiffened. He turned around slowly, his burning eyes constricting before they finally landed on Ning Shu. He raised the corner of his mouth, lowered his eyes, and said in a low voice, "Can't you see what I'm doing? I've been waiting for this opportunity for so many years. Now it's finally in my hands. Shu, aren't you happy for me? I did what I said to you when we were young. If it were you in the past, you would definitely be happy for me, right?" Ning Shu was so angry that her lips were trembling as she stared at the people who were stabbed because they ran away in fear of death. She clenched her fists and said, "Xiao Yuni, no matter if it's the current me or the past me, if you think that I'll be happy for you, then you've never known me. In the past, you said that you would rely on your own hard work and your own hands to make people look at you in a different light and become a person above others. That's a pair of hands that should be used to wipe their own sweat, not stained with the blood of others." She took a deep breath, her voice softening as she pleaded, "Xiao Yuni, can you stop? Don't make me look down on you." Chao Ho's angry roar interrupted. "Yuni, my son, why are you still talking nonsense with this girl? What she wants today is the lives of you and my son. Kill her. I order you to kill her immediately. This despicable girl. I can't tolerate her taking another breath in this world." Xiao Yuni's eyes trembled. Good. You can't do it, right? Then mother will help you." Chao Ho squeezed out a thick sound of disdain from the bottom of his throat. He snatched a long sword from the hand of a guard at the side, and with a malicious sneer, he viciously stabbed it towards Ning Shu's heart. Very few people knew that when she was still a young girl, in order to become the most invincible mother of the nation in the future, she had also learned some riding and archery skills, as well as the basics of swords and sabers. However, after so many years, she had not found a place to use them until today. Chapter 785. Ning Diyuan was busy fighting with Yang Chengwei and had no time to worry about his back. When the tip of Chao Ho's sword was only an inch away from Ning Shu's heart, Princess He Xan screamed and desperately rushed to protect Ning Shu in front of her body. Oh! The sharp blade cut through the flesh, and there was a sound similar to the sound of silk tearing. "Mother! He Xan!" Ning Shu's heart stopped. She turned around and hugged her mother. She saw that the light purple silk on her mother's back was soaked in blood. There was a long gash from her shoulder to her shoulder blade. Her skin was torn open, and blood was flowing out from the red flesh. No one thought that she, who had been sick for so many years and could be blown away by the wind, could squeeze out so much strength to block a fatal blow for her daughter. In the midst of Ning Shu's tears, He Xin forced a smile and reached out to touch her face. She pushed her away forcefully. Don't cry. Mother is fine. Run. Diyuan, protect our daughter." Chao Ho took back his sword and looked at the blood dripping from the tip of the sword. He was very regretful. "Run? Now that the situation is completely under my control, what are you still dreaming about? You're really naive. Come, respectfully send Duke Ning on his way." Duke Ning fought against many people alone. Wounds fell on his body like a web. He looked deeply at his wife and daughter through the shadows of the sabers and swords. His eyes were red. With a roar, he swung his saber and cut off the neck of a bodyguard. However, more people took his place. Bloody shadows and cold light came at his head. Duke Ning raised his saber to block them. His knees were bent by the joint force, and he fell heavily to the ground. Seeing that he was about to be chopped to death, Ning Shu picked up a broken sword from the ground and desperately rushed over. She blocked a blow for her father, but she attracted the bloodthirsty teeth of the hungry wolf to her body. Duke Ning's eyes were filled with tears. "Shu, don't worry about father, you go. Go." "No, I can't. Ning Shu gritted her teeth and resisted. She was the one who brought her family into the sea of fire. If she escaped, she would be nothing. What was that? Ning Shu's arm was scratched, and her leg was wounded. Using a broken sword to block, she was forced to retreat step by step. His internal organs burned as if they were on fire, and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. She held back her tears and desperately refused to let them fall. Gritting her teeth, she smiled and said, "Father, Mother, you said that we are a family. Even if a family dies, we should die together." With a ding, the broken sword broke again. She no longer had anything to defend herself with. The stone in her heart silently fell. She bitterly smiled and forcefully closed her eyes, waiting for the final moment to arrive. However, he heard a few horrifying cries of alarm at the same time. That kind of terror pierced his eardrums. Her tightly shut eyes couldn't see anything. She only felt a sudden flash of light and shadow, blocking the thousands of soldiers and horses in front of her. That figure was as thin as paper and covered in dried bloodstains. It was obvious that he was on the verge of death. His body was trembling slightly, and his steps were unsteady. With a slight movement, he looked like he was going to lie down. However, he was like a god who refused to kneel, stubbornly protecting her behind him. His sense of propriety was unshakable. Ning Shu's eyes trembled violently, and huge teardrops fell uncontrollably. At the same time, on the other side, there was a shocking mutiny. "Sixth Prince! Sixth Princey! His Majesty!" Before he could say the last word, his mouth was tightly covered by the old official. He was so scared that he fainted on the ground. In this shocking mutiny, Ning Shu's eyes were wide open, and the image of Chao Ho's bright yellow phoenix robe slowly falling was clearly reflected in Ning Shu's eyes. Among the retreating crowd, Xiao Yuni raised his blood-stained sword and expressionlessly pulled out the sword that had pierced into his flesh. He swept his gaze over the crowd and looked at Ning Shu for a few seconds. Finally, he coldly withdrew his gaze and walked in front of the half-unconscious Heaven Choice Emperor. He raised his sword and knelt down, kowtowing in a clear voice. "Empress Chao has rebelled against me and deserves 10,000 deaths. Aken, Xiao Yuni, for Imperial Father, for the world, eliminate her." Chapter 786. The civil and military officials who witnessed everything with their own eyes were frightened. They looked at the sixth prince, who was kneeling on one knee and speaking righteously, and then looked at the empress, who was seriously injured and trembling on the ground. They couldn't help but lower their heads. The people's shout swallowed the entire Meridian Gate. "His Highness the Sixth Prince is wise and mighty. His Highness the Sixth Prince is wise and mighty." Ning Shu's pupils reflected a completely unfamiliar figure amidst the fanatical fanfare. A bone-chilling coldness spread from her heart to her limbs and bones, causing her teeth to chatter and her hands and feet to turn cold. The figure in front of her suddenly woke her up. Her breath stagnated, and the cold blood quickly warmed up. Her heart twitched, and she hurriedly rushed over and tried to hold him up. "Xiao Qing? How are you?" "Xiao Qing, don't scare me." The tears in her eyes flowed freely. Ning Shu leaned over and listened to the heartbeat in his chest that was so low that it was almost inaudible. The tearing pain spread all the way to her toes. "Xiao Qing, how dare you scare me? I'll never talk to you again. Doctor? Where is the doctor? Who am I?" She wanted to hold this person in her arms, but this body was full of scars and was as thin as a piece of broken paper. It was enough to break her heart and tear her lungs out if she touched him hard. The wounds on his arms and back were the freshest, which were left when he broke the rope and ran to save her. Each wound was bleeding, not to mention the thin lips that were as white as the wall ash. This person was dying. Really, he was dying. This terrible thought drilled into her mind so clearly for the first time. It was like a cold abyss, like an inescapable curse, making her cry. "Why are you so arrogant? You're going to die, but you still want to save others. Who wants you to save? Who wants you to save? I won't accept your kindness. Do you hear me?" The person in his arms seemed to move a little. He raised his hand with difficulty and touched her face, as if he wanted to wipe away her tears. However, he inadvertently rubbed the blood on his hand onto her face. That hoarse voice contained an indescribable smile as he said softly, "I heard you. Don't cry. I don't want to die yet. Don't worry." Without waiting for Ning Shu to be happy, that hand landed heavily on her. "Xiao Qing." In the distance, a sharp voice belonging only to the eunuchs pierced his ears and buzzed. "Where's the imperial physician? Quickly bring the imperial physician over. Save his majesty. Save the first prince." When the panic-stricken imperial physician finally arrived, the unconscious Tianzhe emperor was hurriedly escorted back to the palace. Ning Shu held back her tears and forced herself to let go of Xiao Qing. Together with the imperial physician, they carried him onto the palanquin. Princess Hsien was seriously injured, and Duke Ning was also injured in many places. Ning Shu pleaded with eunuch Zhao again and received permission to enter the imperial hospital for treatment. Chao Ho, who everyone thought was dead, was unexpectedly still alive. In order to protect the last trace of the imperial family's face, he was also carried back to the palace to await his majesty's punishment when he regained consciousness. Amidst this ground full of blood and silent crying, the chaos at the Meridian Gate finally came to an end. Xiao Yuni watched as the imperial physicians escorted the Tianzhe emperor's bright yellow dragon robe further and further away. He slowly straightened his knees and stood up from the ground. The bloody sword in his hand was once again held in his hand. He turned back to look at the people who were timidly sizing him up. From now on, he looked down on the world. There was only one person who did not even look at him when they brushed past each other. They were complete strangers. Chapter 787. Your Majesty, please drink the medicine. In the Fu Ning Palace Hall, the heaven-choosing emperor leaned weakly on the armrest of the dragon throne. Zhao Bin held a bowl of medicine in one hand and supported his back with the other. If he let go, this heaven-choosing emperor, who was above all the people, would slide down from the dragon throne and his last bit of face would be wiped clean. Ning Shu stood quietly with her head lowered. She listened to Heaven's Choice Emperor's heavy breathing, which seemed like it would stop at any moment. There was an indescribable smell in the palace. That was the smell of Yama standing outside the palace. In front of life and death, whether it was grass or the ruler of the world, he finally got a rare moment of fairness. Heaven's Choice Emperor coughed a few more times. He squeezed out a bit of strength from his body and pushed away the bowl in Zhao Bin's hand. He pushed away the blood-red plum blossom on his neck that was covered by the dragon robe. The 5 petals were full and shocking. Jin knows that I don't have long to live. Why would I drink that bitter thing? Take it away for Jin. Jin has drunk bitter things for more than 10 years. Why would I drink more? Cough, cough. Zhao Bin tried to persuade him, but Heaven's Choice Emperor had already made up his mind. Zhao Bin wiped his tears and passed the bowl of medicine to the eunuch beside him. He hurriedly patted Heaven's Choice Emperor's back. After coughing out a mouthful of blood, his chest finally felt better. Heaven's Choice Emperor let out a long sigh. Only then did he have time to look at Ning Shu, who had been waiting for a long time. Heaven's Choice Emperor waved his hand. Ning Shu, come in front of Jun. Ning Shu lowered her head and quietly took a few steps forward. This subject's daughter obeys. Heaven's Choice Emperor frowned. Why are you lowering your head? Are you afraid that Jin will eat you? Even if you want to eat you, you need to have the strength. Jun is about to die. His last sentence was unusually long. It was as if he struggled and struggled countless times, but in the end, he had to accept the peace and quiet like stagnant water. As Ning Shu listened, her heart clenched for some reason. She silently raised her head, only to discover that this insufferably arrogant emperor had already turned white without anyone noticing. He had aged like dry bark, and his eyes were no longer as clear and domineering as before. This person, without the emperor's skin, indeed had a similar outline to Xiao Qing's. And this person, who had been arrogant and selfish all his life, finally made up for the son he had let down for so many years with his life. With tears in her eyes, Ningxu replied in a low voice, "His Majesty is the true dragon, the son of heaven. His Majesty has a flood of good fortune. He will definitely turn danger into safety." Heaven's Choice Emperor's ears were about to grow calluses after hearing this kind of polite words. "Don't say this kind of nonsense. Jin called you here today for two things. First, you said that you had a close friend surnamed Duan, who said he was the only disciple of the cold cloth divine hand. He went to Nanjiang to find an antidote. Did you get a reply?" "Yes, a few days ago. Teacher Duan sent a message saying he found a secret method that could possibly cure the plum blossom insect poison." Ningxu paused and looked hesitantly at Heaven's Choice Emperor. She bit her lip and said, "Only the distance from Nanjiang to the capital is very long and the journey is very difficult. It took 5 days to send a messenger pigeon. I'm afraid it will take him at least 10 days to reach the capital." Heaven's Choice understood her meaning and said without care, "You don't have to be afraid to say it. Jin knows that he won't live past the next 3 to 5 days. It's fine as long as he can rush back to save Qing. Secondly, have you figured out your background?" Ningxu paused and clenched her fists with complicated feelings. She told the truth. "Yes. You understand the entire truth?" "Yes." "Do you hate Jin out of jealousy?" Ningxu's long eyelashes trembled. The calm water in her heart was disturbed. All the suppressed emotions were stirred up, making her mood very complicated. After a short period of silence, Ningxu took a deep breath. She looked at Heaven's Choice Emperor with the most direct gaze and replied with one word, "Yes." Chapter 788. Heaven's Choice Emperor coldly stared at her. His eyes blurred her image. Funing Hall was completely silent. Only Heaven's Choice Emperor and Ningxu were facing off against each other. After a while, Heaven's Choice Emperor smiled. He coughed a few times into his handkerchief. "Girl, you're quite honest. You're too lazy to pretend in front of me. Forget it, in the end, it's me who feels guilty." He stopped halfway and tilted his head toward Zhao Bin. "It's rare for me to be in such good spirits. I don't know what will happen in the future. While I can still say a few words, let's end everything today, Zhao Bin." Zhao Bin understood and raised his chin towards his subordinate eunuch. He continued to coax Heaven's Choice Emperor with red eyes to drink another mouthful of medicine. When Yin Zhaoi heard the news, she saw this scene. She didn't even seem to notice Ningxu. Her two curved eyebrows knitted together, and she didn't even remember to hold her dress. She walked over with a worried expression and squatted by Heaven's Choice Emperor's feet. She placed her hands on Heaven's Choice Emperor's knees and raised her head. 2 streams of tears flowed down her cheeks. "Your Majesty, how can you not take care of yourself when you're poisoned? How can this concubine not feel sad seeing this? Your Majesty, this concubine represents all the sisters in the palace to ask you to take care of your dragon body." Yin Zhaoi was actually beautiful. Even if she was close to 40 years old and wasn't loved for many years, she couldn't deny this point. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been chosen by Heaven's Choice Emperor as the daughter of a small doctor and be given the honor of entering the harem. It was just that she didn't show off and always pretended to be timid. No matter how beautiful she was, just her appearance would make people lose their appetite. But now that she didn't have any scruples, just by raising her head and crying, she gave people a pitiful feeling of weakness. Only the person who appreciated this beauty was the most heartless person in the world. Heaven's Choice Emperor reached out and gently wiped away the tears on her face. "Beloved concubine, Jun isn't dead yet. Who are you crying for?" This sentence made Yin Zhaoi freeze in place. Heaven's Choice Emperor sneered and used the most disgusted gaze to push her to the side. Yin Zhaoi staggered back and was quickly caught by Xu Shui. "Your Majesty." Before Yin Zhaoi could cry out in grievance, Zhao Bin glared fiercely at her. "Zhaoi Nyang Nyang, His Majesty is ill. You should shut up." Yin Zhaoi choked, and the door of Funing Palace opened once again. Chao Ho, who had taken off her phoenix robe, was carried in by the guards who placed her against the door. The person who was watching over her was actually her good son, Xiao Yuni, whom she had carefully chosen. Upon closer inspection, her hair was unkempt, her face was dirty, and the back of her gray shirt was covered in reddish-brown bloodstains. She was lying on the wooden plank like a stray dog, struggling at death's door. She was relying on her last breath to not die. 6 people, 5 different powers. Just like this, they stood in a strange position in this spacious and small Fu Ning palace hall. The door was closed, and the room was a little dim. Only the dragon throne under Heaven Choice Emperor gave off a dazzling light. When she narrowed her eyes and saw Heaven's Choice Emperor's pitiful state, Chao Ho's deathly pale face suddenly turned red. She was extremely excited, blood dripping from the corner of her mouth as she laughed, dirtying her once graceful face to the point that it was worse than a beggar's. You're also going to die. Ha, my majesty, you've carefully set up such a big trap to catch me and my family in one fell swoop. In the end, you're also going to die. Xiao Mingsheng. Ah, Xiao Mingsheng, you've caused me so much pain in this life. Chapter 789. How have you not harmed this one? Facing Chao Ho's question, the temperature in Heaven Choice Emperor's eyes dropped to the freezing point. Chao Wenyu, do you think I don't know that when you chose to marry me, it was because you thought I was a poor prince that would be easy to manipulate and help your Chao family rise to the top? Or do you think this one doesn't know that your Chao family secretly wanted to give you to my good brother, but was rejected? In the end, you and I were just using each other from the start. Why do we need to pretend to be a loving couple? This one originally wanted to protect your face and treat you well because of your Chao family's contributions. But what did you do? You forced this one to ignore the woman I love the most and wait for her death. You caused this one and my son to be separated from each other, and you reached your hands out to this one, treating this one as a puppet in your hands, holding the emperor to order his vassals. If there was a chance, you would want to kill this one so that you could become the world-shaking empress. Because of his anger, Heaven's Choice Emperor coughed again, coughing so hard that he almost couldn't breathe. Zhao Bin quickly knelt on one knee to calm down Heaven's Choice Emperor's anger. Tears flowed down his old face. My good emperor, you can't be angry anymore. Heaven's Choice Emperor pushed him aside and impatiently said, now that things have reached this point, this one doesn't need to fight with you over who is right and who is wrong. Ningshu, this one gave you this case in the beginning, so it's better for you to finish this case. Other than you, there is no one more suitable. Hearing these short words, Yin Zhaoi felt cold all over. She clenched her fists and timidly smiled. Your Majesty, this concubine is just a stupid woman and doesn't understand what you're saying. Moreover, this concubine's status is low and shouldn't disturb the matters between your Majesty and the Empress. This concubine has recently obtained a few prescriptions for head illnesses that can make your Majesty's headache feel better. How about this concubine first leaves and decoct the prescriptions to help your Majesty? Zhao Yinyang, please wait. Ningshu arrogantly bent her knees. After a quick salute, she stood up and blocked Yin Zhaoi's path. What I'm about to say next, you're one of the most important protagonists. Without you, today's play would have been in vain. Everything that has happened today is something your Highness has spent over 20 years to achieve. Wouldn't it be a pity if she couldn't witness it with her own eyes? Yin Zhaoi was supported by Su Shui. She hadn't taken 2 steps when she stopped. She frowned and said, Young Miss Ning, I don't understand what you're talking about. For so many years, this consort has kept her place in the palace, only wanting to share His Majesty's burdens. This consort has not dared to meddle in other matters, not even daring to say a word. If you continue to make irresponsible remarks, this consort can only plead with His Majesty to punish you for your disrespect. Keep her place? Ningshu seemed to have heard something funny. She lowered her head and covered her mouth as she laughed foolishly. What a good keep her place. Nyang has endured hardships for so many years and painstakingly managed everything. You've almost played the inside and outside of the palace in your hands. You even didn't hesitate to send your own son to a strong opponent to be a chess piece. Could it be that you don't feel reluctance and heartache? Oh, this concubine understands. It's not that you aren't a good mother, but that you deeply hate the bloodline that flows in his body and wish you hadn't given birth to this son. Is this concubine's guess correct? Dr. Shi and Princess Royal Mingjia. Chapter 790. The words eldest Princess Mingjia were like a clap of thunder, shocking everyone present. The horsetail whisk in Zhao Bin's hand almost slipped to the ground. Even Chao Ho, who had been scolding, was stunned. Xiao Yunyi's expression was extremely ugly, and he turned his face to the side. Mingjia, eldest princess? Chao Ho's stuttering voice was squeezed out from his throat in disbelief. His forehead twitched as if he had heard something extremely ridiculous. Under everyone's gaze, the old servant, who had been wearing a half-burnt ghost face and looked as if it would take her life just to raise her head, looked around in horror. She hurriedly buried her face deep in her chest and knelt down. What eldest princess? This noble lady, what are you talking about? This old servant really doesn't understand. This old servant is just a pitiful ant that can't climb up. Please, noble lady, let this old servant live. His shriveled and weak body was like an old dog with broken legs and claws. He was crouching at the corner of the wall and begging for a stick that was about to be swung down. The word pitiful was written all over his body. Yin Zhaoyi took a deep breath, her face red with grief and anger. She clenched her fists and said angrily, "It's true that I used to be a medical girl. If I wasn't a medical girl, I wouldn't have met His Majesty by chance when I entered the palace to take a pulse and become acquainted with His Majesty. Although I'm a lowly medical girl and have been looked down upon by people all year round, I've never felt that I'm lower than others. Why would you humiliate me like this? Lady Ning, I don't know how I've offended you. If it can make you calm down, I'll give up the honor of being a consort and apologize to you. However, Sushua has been by my side for more than 20 years. Fate has already treated her so harshly. I don't ask for your kindness and pity. How can you bear to force such a pitiful person into a dead end? What eldest Princess Mingjia? That year, His Majesty and Her Highness personally led people to see the corpse and verify her identity. Are you doubting His Majesty's judgment? It's really laughable." Zhao Bin, who had been in shock the entire time, mumbled, "Indeed, at that time, I personally accompanied His Majesty. The characteristics of that corpse were exactly the same as Princess Royal Mingjia. In the end, it couldn't be faked." Ningshu looked at Yin Zhaoyi's tearful accusation and was not afraid at all. Her eyes were as sharp as swords. What if the fire, including the burned corpse, was a premeditated show from the beginning? What nonsense are you talking about? What's there to act about? Yin Zhaoyi almost laughed out in ridicule. At that time, countless people in the palace knew about the fire. It was because Empress Xiao Zhou suddenly went crazy that she killed someone and lit the fire. At that time, even she almost burned to death. When she woke up and found out that she had killed her own daughter, she repeatedly harmed herself. In the end, she set a fire and burned herself to death on Phoenix Stage. Yet you say that it was premeditated? Let this consort ask you, if she really had the ability to do so, why would she put herself in such a desperate situation? Why would she still be reviled by the world after her death? Also, if she really faked it, how could she help her daughter escape and hide from His Majesty and Her Majesty personally examining the corpse? Lady Ning, you are very smart, but sometimes it's better to be too smart. It's very simple how to avoid the autopsy. You just need to bribe one person, Ning Shu said lightly. Who? For some reason, the hairs on Zhao Bin's back stood up. He was so scared that he panicked like a mouse. But it's not me. Heaven and earth can bear witness to this old servant's loyalty to His Majesty. Ning Shu pursed her lips and smiled. Don't worry, Chief Steward Zhao. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the other person here. Her gaze swept, calmly sweeping from one person to another until it reached Xiao Ho, who was lying on the wooden board in a sorry state like a wild dog. She smiled faintly, and her gaze was incomparably sharp. Your Majesty, this subject's daughter didn't guess wrongly, right? Princess Mingjia was able to survive because of you. It's all thanks to you and little Empress Zhou that you laid out such a huge lie. Chapter 791. Chao Ho's entire body twitched as if she had been struck by lightning. She widened her reddened, wrinkled eyes and said in a hoarse voice, "What nonsense are you talking about? This Empress and Empress Zhou are irreconcilable. When did I ever have anything to do with her?" Seeing Chao Ho still trying to quibble, Ning Shu's heart was in turmoil. She really didn't know how to look at this woman who was still the noblest in the Great Yu dynasty, but was also the most miserable woman. Did she hate her? She hated her. Was she pitiful? Extremely pitiful. Empress, is there really nothing? Amidst Chao Ho's exasperation, her voice was exceptionally calm. If there isn't anything, then why are your eyes always in a daze? Now that things have reached this point, your stubborn resistance is already meaningless, isn't it? A single sentence, so dull yet so sharp, like a hammer, smashed the last false barrier in front of Chao Ho to pieces. From then on, she had nowhere to hide. 25 years ago, you assisted His Majesty in personally planning that year's palace coup, roping an eldest princess, Xiao Mingxue, to poison the previous crown prince, causing him to become a madman, a cripple, and completely torn apart from the throne. Empress Zhou painfully lost her weight and completely lost her power. Seeing that death was at hand, in order to protect her only flesh and blood, she had no choice but to personally force herself into a dead end, reaching an agreement with the person she originally hated the most. A goo that could control the world and make people tremble in fear. In exchange for the life of a sickly person who could die at any time, this kind of transaction was enough to move anyone, including you, Empress, who was destined to be the mother of the world at that time, but still couldn't satisfy your ambitions. Thus, with one hand, the other hand, the person, and the predicted high fever. That little girl who was born in the same year, month, and day as Xiao Mingjia, who had an auspicious aura, who was carefully selected to resist the evil aura of Xiao Mingjia's fate, was quietly sent out of the palace. Her memories were erased, and she returned to being the youngest daughter of an ordinary official family. Then, not long after, there was a big fire. Blood splattered all over the phoenix algae, frightening the world. In the end, Empress Zhou died in Phoenix Terrace, and the legend of a generation became an unspeakable secret. Not to mention Zhao Bin. Even Xiao Yuni, who had pretended to be indifferent, could not hide his shock after hearing such a terrifying story. Heaven's Choice Emperor's face was incomparably heavy. He clenched his tiger palm. His gaze was dark as he said, "You are saying your mother and Princess X are actually Xiao Mingjia that Empress Zhou purposely sent out of the palace?" Ning Shu smiled and shook her head. "I once had such suspicions. After all, Mother left the palace at such an opportune time." Furthermore, before Mother entered the palace when she was young, she was lively and healthy. There was no reason for her to become a different person after leaving the palace. Throughout the year, she constantly had minor illnesses, but major illnesses were nothing new. She lived like a delicate beauty. She was too similar to the rumored Princess Mingjia. However, no, I was certain that she was not. For more than 10 years, I have been raised by her. In this world, no one knows better than me what kind of weak and soft-hearted person my mother is. How could she be the person who hid in the dark and set up this trap when she was crushed to death with a sorrowful expression? She did not have this ability. Thus, I continued to be confused until she slowly turned her head and looked at Su Shui, who had her head lowered and did not even dare to raise her head. The veins on the back of her hands were unconsciously popping out. That day in the mountain temple, when I met Su Shui for the second time, I found that after removing the hideous scars on her face, she was actually faintly similar to my mother. After that, all the answers in my heart jumped out of the water. It turned out that Empress Zhou casually threw out a bait and actually played with everyone here, and even the entire imperial harem and the entire imperial court. 25 years. Chapter 792. That person is truly the smartest and most understanding woman in the world. Shu Shui Mama. Ah, the real Princess Royal of Mingjia, don't you think so? Along with Ning Shu's light laugh that was filled with complicated emotions, the entire hall fell into a stunned, deathly silence. Their gazes were practically frozen stiff as they locked onto the lowly old woman that could be said to be ugly and wretched. They didn't dare believe it, yet they had no choice but to believe it. Amidst the numerous terrified and burning gazes, Shu Shui slowly raised her cold and dark face that was covered in scars, and she expressionlessly welcomed the scrutiny of everyone as a ridiculing sneer rolled out from her throat, and it was extremely ridiculing. The one who broke the silence wasn't anyone else but the Empress. After a short moment of shock, Chao Ho's throat made gurgling sounds. Her entire body spasmed, and she almost cried out. So, Ben Gong was fooled by that evil woman from beginning to end. This is impossible. Absolutely impossible. Ben Gong actually. Years of pride crumbled in a single day. She was like a fool. Towards this kind of Chao Ho, Ning Shu even felt some pity. For such a proud and conceited person, this was a devastating blow. A casual stroke had denied her for the rest of her life. Ning Shu continued. Young Empress Zhou is most concerned about her youngest daughter. But she knows that even if she reaches an agreement with the Empress to secretly send her out of the palace, according to the Empress's usual ruthless methods, she will not let her off easily. She will do everything in her power to silently and completely eradicate this weakness. Thus, Empress Xiao Zhou thought of another brilliant idea. She released my mother as bait to create a diversion. At the same time, she gave Princess Mingjia another identity, stealing the sky and swapping the sun. The most powerful part of this plan was that even the smartest person wouldn't think that Empress Zhou, who loved her daughter the most in the world, would be willing to personally disfigure her most precious daughter. The result was just as Empress Zhou predicted. No matter if it was my mother or me, these years could be described as a curse. We endured the Empress's ruthlessness. As for the real Princess Mingjia, she quietly hid in the palace. Everything went smoothly, and she stayed there for 25 years. Today, I can no longer hide it. Until Ning Shu finished speaking, Heaven's Choice Emperor slowly digested this shocking truth. He slowly turned to Shu Shui. Are you really Mingjia? At some point, Shu Shui had already straightened her back. Then, with one hand on her knee, she slowly stood up from the ground. Her movements were elegant and gentle. The two pearls on the side of her face did not move. Her posture and etiquette were more dignified and proud than any of the princesses in the imperial harem. With her ruined face, she smiled gently and said, "That's right. My beloved brother, you don't recognize me at all. I still remember clearly when you came to Mother's palace to greet her when you were young. You bowed and bent your knees." Heaven's Volition's expression changed a few times. In the end, he swallowed his words and closed his eyes while sighing. Xiao Mingjia, how dare you? The first to break down was Chao Ho. After being manipulated for more than 20 years, she seemed to have understood everything in an instant. She crazily climbed down from the door and roared, "Xiao Mingjia, were you the one who caused my son's death? Isn't that right? Speak." Shu Shui turned her head and looked at her disdainfully. "You're only reacting now? Just a little trick, and you're fighting with that Jiang Shi to the death. You really are stupid." With just 2 short sentences, Chao Ho completely went crazy. Chapter 793. The princess of a country, who was held in the palm of the hands of the entire imperial city, who would feel heartache even if the wind blew on her, had her life turned upside down overnight. Shu Shui, no, Xiao Mingjia, had countless nightmares in the past 25 years. That night, the sky was filled with flames that danced and swallowed in front of her eyes. Next to her was her brother's corpse that had been pierced through the heart by her mother. Her mother's hands were covered in blood as she walked in front of her with tears in her eyes. She cried loudly as she was pressed down by Muhu. Then, inch by inch, She was pressed into the fire by that pair of formerly gentle hands. That scalding tongue of fire licked her face. It hurt, it hurt, it hurt, it hurt, ah! She could clearly feel that her flesh was being burned, but she could not hide. She crazily struggled, cried, begged, and even screamed for death. However, the only response she received was the hand that pressed down on her neck even harder, and 2 drops of water fell on her head. When half of her face was burned and the hand on her neck finally let go, she heard her mother's sorrowful voice. "I'm sorry. Mother couldn't protect you. I'm sorry. Mother had no other choice. My Jia, you have to live. You have to live." Xiao Mingjia forcefully closed her eyes, dispelling that unbearable memory. When she opened her eyes again, they were filled with venom. She looked down on Xiao Ho and said, "That year, you and Xiao Ming Lu used a bowl of medicine to harm my brother, harmed us mother and children, and caused me to live a life that was neither human nor ghost for the past 25 years. Then I will do the same and use a bowl of medicine to return it to you. I don't even need to painstakingly search for a scapegoat. You have already found a scapegoat for me. That Jiang family is really unlucky to have met you." She turned around and fiercely pointed at Heaven's Choice Emperor. "And you, a coward who only knows how to hide in a woman's crotch to steal the country, and even pushed his beloved to death without blinking an eye. My ancestors, open your eyes and look. A poisonous woman, a coward. My great Yu dynasty's hundreds of years of foundation was stolen by these 2 illegitimate things. Now, all of this is the retribution you deserve." Huh? When Xiao Ho heard this, she went completely crazy. Her bones were broken, but she didn't hesitate to crawl on the ground. She wanted to crawl over and perish together with Xiao Mingjia. The Empress, who used to be high and mighty, was now no different from a beggar on the streets. "I'll kill you. I'll kill you." Xiao Mingjia didn't even move as he watched her crawl on the ground. He sneered, "Empress Chao, who can you kill now?" Behind her, Heaven's Choice Emperor coughed violently. He slammed his trembling hand on the dragon throne and squeezed out all the energy in his body. "Xiao Mingjia, don't forget that we are not dead yet. We can still kill you." Xiao Mingjia wasn't afraid at all. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Imperial brother, if you have the leisure to shout at me, why don't you worry about your own life first? Why don't you use your fingers to calculate? Your poison won't last for more than a few hours." Zhaobin was so angry that he was trembling. "Princess Mingjia, this old servant advises you to quickly take out the antidote if you know what's good for you. Otherwise, there is no need for His Majesty to make a move. This old servant will be bold enough to end you first." Xiao Mingjia smiled foolishly and didn't say a word. She was like a lonely ghost that had been starved for more than 20 years. The more frightened and angry others were, the more full she was. At the side, Heaven's Choice Emperor coughed violently and spat out a mouthful of rotten blood. Zhao Bin was so anxious that his forehead was covered in sweat. His shrill voice filled the entire palace. He quickly called for the imperial guards to kill this poisonous woman without mercy. However, Ning Shu sighed and slowly shook her head. "It's useless. The antidote is not on her." "Then who is it on? Quickly say it." Ning Shu turned around and looked at Xiao Ho, who was crawling on the ground like a wild dog, with pity. Chapter 794. In an instant, numerous gazes landed on Xiao Ho. She twitched nervously and laughed. "Is there a need for that? Of course, it's on me." "Huh?" She crawled halfway and stopped. She laid on the ground and laughed evilly with her glaring red eyes. She stuck to everyone and laughed wildly. "You want the antidote? Then kill her for this consort first. Kill her first. If I don't see her head fall to the ground today, then no one will get the antidote." Yin Zhaoyi's expression changed. Heaven's Choice Emperor laughed coldly. Zhao Bin tightened his grip on the horsetail whisk and looked at Xiao Mingjia with narrowed eyes. Xiao Mingjia's stiff face twitched, and he gritted his teeth. "Chao Wenyu, you poisonous woman! You think I don't know? You can't save him. It's impossible." While Xiao Mingjia and Empress Chao were biting each other and cursing like shrews, Zhao Bin raised his hand and ordered the guards to stand behind Xiao Mingjia. He solemnly said, "Eldest Miss Ning, please tell me what exactly is going on with this plum blossom kiss poison?" Ning Shu sighed and said slowly, "Plum blossom kiss, originally known as the plum blossom goo, is a pair of rare goo that was brought out from the southern border by Han E Divine Hands Qin Ran. The goo is the mother goo and the child goo is in the body. It can remain dormant for many years and become restless when it hears a killing order. And this killing order is none other than a drop of blood from the host of the mother goo. The more blood there is, the faster it eats, until all the internal organs of the host of the child goo are eaten and turned into a pool of black blood. The child goo will slowly crawl out of the rotten flesh. This is why, after the air was poisoned, the prince used the entire power of the South pacifying king's residence, but was unable to find the culprit and method of poisoning. He could only watch as the heir's 5 senses weakened. Old princess, you had given us a hint long ago. The sleeping clothes that she embroidered before she died had a plum blossom dyed with blood. Because the method of poisoning is none other than a drop of blood that is impossible to guard against. Zhao Bin was shocked when he heard this. No wonder I inspected everything your majesty touched. I even tasted everything that was imported. Even if it was tea or medicine that Chao Shi forced to feed your majesty, I still kept a spoonful for myself to taste. But nothing happened to the miscellany. Only his majesty was caught in this situation. It turned out that the most important thing was never those things, but the child venomous insect that was planted in his majesty's body from the beginning. Madam Chao, you are simply, you want to say vicious? Chao Shi completely accepted his hatred and laughed even more heartily. Ha ha, that's right. As the saying goes, villains and villains work together. If this consort wasn't poisonous, how could this consort be worthy of Xiao Mingxing? Ha! I advise you not to waste your time here. You might as well get rid of that bitch, Xiao Mingjia, as soon as possible. Otherwise, I'm afraid your majesty won't be able to reverse the situation. When the guard raised his sword, Yin Zhaoi rushed over crazily and blocked in front of Xiao Mingjia. You can't. Back then, I was still a little female doctor who followed grandfather into the palace to treat a noble. Because of a moment of carelessness, I made a mistake and almost lost my life. It was Princess Mingjia and Her Highness Empress Zhou who happened to pass by and saved my family's lives. You have already harmed Her Highness and the princess deeply. Where's your conscience? Has it all been eaten by dogs? Yuni, my son, come and save your mother. Xiao Yuni, who had been standing silently in the corner of the hall with an ashen expression, heard his biological mother's call, and his eyelids twitched. He looked up with an extremely complicated expression, the veins on his arms twitching. Yin Zhaoi looked forward to it and said in a bloodthirsty voice, Yuni, my son, the guards in this hall are all under your command. As long as you give the order to kill Empress Chao, this vicious woman, and this evil eunuch, you don't need to beg anyone in the future. This throne will belong to you today. Yuni, my son, I am your biological mother. I definitely won't harm you. Kill them quickly. Chapter 795. Just as she was shouting crazily, Xiao Yuni's gaze uncontrollably landed on the golden throne under the heaven-choosing emperor's butt. His eyes turned red, and then, as if he had made up his mind, he walked towards the jade stairs with his sword in his hand. Ning Shu's heart jumped, and she stopped him. Xiao Yuni, you have to know what you're doing. Xiao Yuni seemed to have fallen into a trance as he pushed Ning Shu to the side mercilessly. Scram! Seeing this, Yin Zhaoi's eyes lit up and she reached out towards Xiao Yuni, grabbing his arm and shoulder. She laughed loudly. Yes, yes. Just like that, Yuni, my good son, walk towards mother and stand with mother. You crawled out of my stomach and are originally a ball of flesh and blood in my body. Our hearts are truly connected. Mother will definitely help you with all her strength. Before Yin Zhaoi could finish her words, she suddenly felt a chill in her chest. Something cold pierced through her chest, and there was a tearing sound. Blood splattered everywhere. The smile on Yin Zhaoyi's face froze at that moment. Her bulging eyes were fixed on Xiao Yunyi's cold face. Before she could say anything, the sword was pulled out, and she didn't even have the time to hear her own flesh and blood say goodbye to her before she fell to the ground. Her eyes reflected the complicated patterns on the palace dome, and her pupils dilated until they turned gray. With another tearing sound, Xiao Mingjia, who had pulled out the dagger from his sleeve, didn't even have the time to resist before his throat was slit. In such a short time, 2 lives were lost on the Jade Stairs. Their blood was still boiling hot, but they had already entered the netherworld. Even an outsider like Ning Shu was shocked by his action of killing his mother with his own hands. She couldn't help but tremble in fear. Xiao Yunyi, who had just killed 2 lives, knelt down towards the heaven-choosing emperor with a hoarse voice. "Aken, for the sake of Imperial Father, I put justice before family. Other than Imperial Father, this son will not be loyal to anyone else. Imperial Father, please rest assured." The Heaven's Choice Emperor's pupils constricted. He paused for a moment before hesitantly reaching out his skinny hand and patting his shoulder. Following his gesture, the tightly shut doors of Funing Palace opened with a loud bang. No one would have expected that there would be countless soldiers standing outside this frighteningly quiet palace. "You are indeed my good son, my good son. I wasn't wrong about you." The cold arrows and swords in each soldier's hands were locked on everyone in the hall other than the Heaven's Choice Emperor, including Xiao Ho, Ning Shu, and Xiao Yunyi. Some of the sword grooves were still dripping with blood that had yet to dry up. It was obvious that a bloody battle had just ended. Ning Shu's back was drenched in sweat from the lingering fear. Her mind was already clear. If Xiao Yunyi had made the wrong choice just now, he would be the one with his head separated from his body. So this was the heart of an emperor, the heart of an emperor of the Xiao clan. Amidst this deathly silence, Empress Qiao raised her head and laughed maniacally. "How delightful. That's great. That's really great. All of you who have harmed this consort, scram to the underworld." "Ha ha ha ha!" Zhao Bin shrieked. "Your Majesty, they are already dead. You should have taken out the antidote for the plum blossom kiss, right?" Empress Qiao laughed for a long time and ignored him. Only when Zhao Bin scolded her again did she slowly stop laughing. "You're asking me for the antidote?" She seemed to have heard a joke. "You're asking me for the antidote? You're actually asking me for the antidote?" Then she laughed crazily. Chapter 796. At the side, Heaven's Choice Emperor bent over and spat out another mouthful of black blood. Zhao Bin said in pain, "Lady Ning, what is she laughing at? Is the antidote on her? His Majesty can't wait. Other than His Majesty, there is also Xiahou Shitzi. Xiahou Shitzi's life is also at stake. Young Miss Ning, please find the antidote for this poison." Ning Shu's nose turned sour as she clenched her fists. She slowed down and walked in front of Qiao Ho. She bent down on one knee. "Empress, now that you have your revenge and the truth is clear, I have no grudge with you. I have never had any grudges with you. Ning Shu begs you, give me the antidote." "Antidote?" Qiao Ho suddenly paused with a strange expression. "The antidote for this plum blossom kiss is my boiling blood. If I take the antidote, I will lose my life. Whether I give you the antidote or not, I will die. I might as well drag the Emperor of the world to hell with me. It will be my Qiao Wenyu's glory." "Huh?" Ning Shu was shocked and suddenly leaned over to stop her. "Empress!" But Qiao Ho was faster. Her back teeth moved as if she had bitten through something and swallowed it down her throat. "Stop her!" Zhao Bin's pupils shrunk, but it was too late. Qiao Ho's chest shook, and then thick black blood flowed out of her 7 orifices. She looked at everyone mockingly and laughed sinisterly as she crawled on the ground. "Imperial Physician, call the Imperial Physician over. Leave her life for me. Leave her life for His Majesty. What are you waiting for? Hurry!" However, it was still too late. Qiao Ho's body spasmed on the ground as large mouthfuls of black blood flowed out of her mouth and nose. Ning Shu rushed over and covered her mouth with all her might, but it was useless. Pressing down on her vital meridians was also useless. In the end, no one could stop a person who wanted to die. Empress, I beg you to tell me who has the mother goo that Xiahou Shixi was infected with. As long as you tell me, I will do anything. Don't die. I beg you. I beg you. Empress Chao didn't answer. She stared in the direction of Heaven's Choice Emperor. She seemed to be crying and hating. She stammered her last words. My Majesty, I will leave first. In the Yellow Springs, I hope to meet you again. Ha, 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 then he stopped breathing. And at the same time, Heaven choosing Emperor's life was cut off. The death of the mother goo meant that none of the child goo survived. Amidst Zhao Bin's sorrowful cries, Xiao Yuni slammed his forehead on the ground and cried out for his father. Countless guards put down their weapons and knelt on the ground to mourn. No one would have thought that the case that had been going on for 25 years would end in such a way. The news of Celestial Empress' death spread through the entire imperial palace and capital city at the fastest speed. Millions of people mourned. At the same time, the sixth prince, Xiao Yuni, was pushed to the position closest to the throne. The fall of one era and the rise of the next seemed to come at the same time. The thing that Xiao Yuni had been looking for 20 years was finally within his reach today. The entire hall was filled with sorrow, yet it also seemed to be filled with joy. Countless officials came forward bravely and surrounded him in the center. Only one person, after repeatedly and unwillingly confirming that Xiao Ho was no longer alive, blacked out and her entire body swayed. Then, she stumbled to her feet in a daze, as if the bustling crowd around her had nothing to do with her. The people and matters of these people, the emperors, generals, ministers, and the change of dynasties were all like smoke to her. Her face was ice cold. She didn't know when, but her eyes were filled with tears. They dried and fell, dried and dried again. Then, she lifted her feet and walked out, completely departing from the absurdity of this whole situation. Xiao Yuni stared hard at her. He wanted to chase after her, but in the end, he was stopped by the endless prosperity. From then on, he couldn't chase after her. Ning Shu walked and walked like a zombie. She swayed, and her eyes were dazed. Many people who brushed past her didn't feel pain when they were bumped into, because the part of their heart that was dug out was already painful to the bone marrow. Xiao Qing. She had solved so many cases and dug up so many truths, but in the end, she still couldn't save the Xiao Qing that she cared about the most. She laughed and wanted to cry, cried and laughed. She laughed so much that all the palace people who hurried past were at a loss and avoided her. She was the only one who walked from one end of the palace to the other, until she reached the entrance of the imperial hospital. She just stood there, not daring to go in. She was afraid, but she didn't think that she would be afraid. She thought that after being reincarnated 7 times and dying tragically, she was no longer afraid of anything. She didn't think that at this moment, she couldn't even take a step in. It seemed that as long as she didn't want to go in, the person lying inside would never die. But could she? Could she? In this life, I'm still in vain. She didn't know how long she stood there until her legs were numb and she was about to fall down. The imperial hospital's door, which had been closed, creaked open. Her heart thumped, and she raised her head. Through her blurry eyes, her ears buzzed. For a moment, she didn't dare to believe her eyes, brain, and mind. She subconsciously reached out to touch the familiar and unbelievable figure in front of her. But before she touched it, she stopped in the air because she was afraid that it was just a shadow in front of her. Once she touched it, it would shatter and disappear. Her hand was about to fall, but it was caught by the person in front of her. That person was still thin and pale, but he smiled gently and said, "What? Can't believe that I'm still alive." Those eyes, which had never been able to focus, fell on her with incomparable clarity. They completely reflected her tears, her sadness, her surprise, her everything. The tears that had dried up for a long time gushed out again. Ning Shu said in disbelief, "You? How could you?" She was so excited that she couldn't speak coherently. A smiling figure walked out from behind Xiao Qing. It was Mr. Duan Changfeng, who had disappeared for a long time. Before she could wipe her tears, Ning Shu threw herself into Xiao Qing's arms. In this moment, the whole world came back from the dead. 7 lives, no regrets. Because he was here. Because she was here. All sounds returned to the spring breeze. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.